Hey there, tonight we're exploring the unforgiving world of ancient Sparta, where the truth is, even the toughest among us would quickly falter under the relentless discipline and stark lifestyle that forged legendary warriors. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. Your eyes flutter open to the sound of, well, not much. No alarm clock, no gentle playlist to ease you into the day, and certainly no aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Welcome to ancient Sparta, where the concept of sleeping in is as foreign as Wi-Fi. The sun's barely kissing the horizon, and already you're expected to be up and at 'em. It's a far cry from your cozy bed at home, but hey, you wanted the authentic Spartan experience, right? First things first, let's talk about where you've woken up. Sorry, no plush mattress or even a pillow to call your own. Instead, you're on a wooden plank surrounded by a bunch of other boys. Welcome to the Agoge, the Spartan education system that makes boot camp look like summer camp. Boys as young as 7 are thrust into this rigorous training, molded into warriors ready to defend Sparta's honor. You might have thought you'd get a few more years of carefree childhood, but nope, that luxury is reserved for future centuries. Your day starts with a quick run. No leisurely jog here. It's all about speed and endurance. The Agoge aims to churn out soldiers who can march for miles without breaking a sweat. If you're lucky, you'll get a piece of stale bread for breakfast to fuel this morning endeavor. It's not exactly the balanced diet you were taught in school, but Spartans aren't exactly known for their culinary arts. The lack of variety in breakfast options isn't an oversight. It's a deliberate choice to toughen you up, to teach you that a warrior's stomach must be as resilient as their resolve. Now, you might be wondering why on earth anyone would put themselves through this. Here's the scoop. Sparta was less about luxury and more about survival. The city-state was surrounded by enemies and needed a standing army ready to fight at a moment's notice. Every Spartan boy was a potential warrior, and every warrior was a cornerstone of Sparta's military dominance. The Agoge was designed not just to train soldiers, but to instill a lifelong devotion to the state. By the way, forget about personal possessions. In this communal setting, everything is shared. Your clothes, hand-me-downs, your meals, communal, your sense of privacy, non-existent. But that's the Spartan way. Individual needs are sacrificed at the altar of collective strength. It's a society that would make modern minimalists weep with envy and then run for the hills. Now, here's a little twist. Stealing is part of your education. Yes, you heard that right. You're actually encouraged to swipe food to survive, but there's a catch. If you get caught, there's hell to pay. This isn't about promoting a life of crime. It's one more lesson in resourcefulness and cunning. Spartans valued these traits since they were crucial on the battlefield. The punishment for getting caught, a good old-fashioned flogging. It's not exactly a slap on the wrist, but it sure is motivation to perfect your sleight of hand. But why all this obsession with military prowess? Sparta wasn't just a city. It was a military state. Every social, political, and economic system was designed to support a formidable army. The Spartan way of life was ruthlessly efficient, and in a world where might often determined right, it made a kind of grim sense. While other Greek city-states were busy pondering philosophy and building beautiful temples, Sparta doubled down on discipline and defense. Now, while you might be longing for a comforting bowl of cereal right about now, Spartan breakfast doesn't get any better. It's time to head out with your peers, a ragtag group of would-be warriors, to begin the heart of your training. The Agoge isn't just about physical endurance, it's a mental game as well. You're taught to think like a Spartan, to strategize, to lead. There's no room for weakness, and the pressure to conform is relentless. And let's not forget the social dynamics. Within your group, hierarchy is everything. Older boys keep the younger ones in line, and every interaction is a lesson in dominance and submission. It's a microcosm of Spartan society, where respect is earned and authority is absolute. The camaraderie you'll build here is less about friendship and more about survival. These are the boys who will stand beside you in battle, and that bond is forged in the fires of shared hardship. As the sun climbs higher, so does the pace of your training. Physical challenges are relentless, designed to push you to your limits and beyond. It's a hard-knock life, and yet, for the Spartans, it's the only life that matters. The agoge isn't just an education. It's an initiation into a world where bravery is the highest virtue and fear is a luxury no one can afford. So, as you adjust to the Spartan morning, you might find yourself questioning this whole arrangement. Why would anyone choose such a harsh existence? But remember, in ancient Sparta, this wasn't a choice. It was a duty, a sacred obligation that defined who you were and who you would become. The relentless pursuit of excellence, the unwavering loyalty to the state, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. Those were the cornerstones of Spartan life. As you trudge through the day, sweaty and exhausted, you may find some solace in knowing you're part of something bigger. This isn't just about you. It's about keeping Sparta strong, about honoring the legacy of warriors who came before. It's tough, it's brutal, and it's utterly Spartan. So take a deep breath, brace yourself, and soldier on. This is just the beginning of your day in ancient Sparta, and believe me, it's going to be one for the history books. And just when you think you've got a handle on this Spartan life, let's dive into the adult world, a place where misery truly finds its company. As you slog through your agoge training, you might think that adulthood offers some reprieve. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Welcome to the Spartan phalanx, the military formation that's less about individual glory and more about being one cog in a well-oiled war machine. Picture this. A wall of interlocking shields, each warrior's life dependent on the guy next to him. Its tactical brilliance wrapped in a social metaphor. You're only as strong as your weakest link. Now, the phalanx wasn't just some nifty battlefield trick. It was the beating heart of Spartan military might. The shields, known as harplans, were about 3 feet in diameter and weighed close to 20 pounds. Imagine lugging that around all day, along with a spear and a short sword. Think of it as cross-fit, but with higher stakes. The phalanx formation required absolute discipline, coordination, and trust. You didn't just fight for yourself. You were fighting for the man on your left and the man on your right. Messing up wasn't just frowned upon, it could get everyone killed. So, what were the expectations for a fully trained Spartan warrior? Well, for starters, forget about any notions of retirement. Spartan males were expected to serve in the military until the age of 60. That's right, 60. While today's soldiers might get a gold watch and a pension, Spartans got a spear and a front row seat at the battlefield. And while we're on the subject of myths, let's tackle the idea of Spartan equality. Sure, every male citizen was theoretically equal in the eyes of the law, but this was a society built on the backs of others, specifically the Helots. Helots were essentially serfs, bound to the land, and tasked with the agricultural labor that allowed Spartans to focus on perfecting their warrior skills. They vastly outnumbered the Spartans, with some estimates suggesting a ratio as high as 7:1. Yet, they lived in constant fear of retribution. Spartans would annually declare war on the Helots, giving them open season to cull any who were deemed a threat. It's a grim reminder that the Spartan way of life, romantic as it may seem, was sustained through oppression. But wait, we're not done unraveling the mythos yet. Let's chat about Spartan women, who, contrary to their contemporaries in other Greek city-states, enjoyed a surprising degree of freedom and influence. They could own property, inherit wealth, and were encouraged to be physically fit. Why? Because strong women produced strong sons, and the cycle of militaristic life continued. While this might sound progressive, it's worth noting that their rights were still primarily tied to their ability to contribute to the state's military needs. So, while they were a cut above their Athenian sisters, it was hardly the land of gender equality. Now, onto one of Sparta's most curious quirks, the dual monarchy. Yes, you heard right. Sparta had not one, but 2 kings simultaneously. Talk about a power-sharing agreement. These kings came from 2 separate royal families, the Agids and the Eurypontids, a setup that supposedly prevented any one ruler from gaining too much power. In practice, it was a delicate balance of tradition and rivalry. Each king had specific roles, often leading different military campaigns, while back home, a council of elders known as the Gerousia and an assembly of citizens provided a semblance of checks and balances. The political structure was as unique as it was complex. The Gerousia, made up of 28 elders over the age of 60 plus the 2 kings, held significant sway, especially in legislative matters. They set the agenda for the Apella, the assembly of male citizens who would then vote, often by simple shout or acclamation. on issues brought forth. Democracy, Spartan style, was less about debate and more about consensus, or at least the appearance of it. But let's not romanticize this dual monarchy too much. The system was fraught with tension. Kings could be deposed if they were deemed unfit or unlucky in battle. It wasn't all pomp and ceremony. There were real stakes involved, both on the battlefield and in the political arena. In the end, Spartan governance was a mix of monarchy, oligarchy, and a smattering of democracy, a political chimera that somehow held together, much like their phalanx. So, as you contemplate your day in this Spartan society, remember that the veneer of simplicity hides a web of complexities. Each rule, every tradition, was a calculated choice aimed at ensuring the survival of the state. But survival came at a cost, a relentless focus on war, a social order maintained by subjugation, and a political system that balanced precariously on the edge of tradition and innovation. Spartan life was a high-wire act of discipline and duty, and as you navigate its demands, you're left with a sobering thought. In Sparta, the individual was nothing without the state, and the state was nothing without its warriors. Welcome to the real world of ancient Sparta, where every day was a battle in more ways than one. But lunchtime approaches, and in Sparta, that's not about indulging in a leisurely meal. It's more like a quick pit stop in the relentless race of the day. Before you start dreaming of a Mediterranean feast, let's set the record straight. Spartan dining is as austere as their lifestyle. Forget about a smorgasbord of delicacies. You're looking at a bowl of what's famously, or infamously, called black broth. This culinary delight consists of boiled pork, blood, salt, and vinegar. Yum, right. It's the kind of dish that makes you appreciate the simplicity of a PB&J. Now, what's really interesting is why Spartan cuisine was so Spartan. The simple answer, economics, or rather, the Spartan aversion to it. You see, Spartans had a peculiar disdain for trade and currency. To them, the pursuit of wealth was a slippery slope, leading away from their cherished values of equality and military focus. Their currency was made of iron spits, known as obloi, which were so cumbersome and heavy that acquiring significant wealth became more of a workout than a financial transaction. Imagine trying to slip a few of these into your wallet, assuming you had one. This iron currency was less about practicality and more about ideology. By making wealth cumbersome, Spartans ensured that their society remained relatively free of the corruption and greed that often plagued their neighbors. It's a classic example of how their economic model was designed to reinforce their military-centric way of life. But let's not put on rose-colored glasses just yet. This system also meant that Spartans were economically isolated, dependent on their helot class to meet basic needs like food production. It's a precarious balance where ideology trumps convenience. And speaking of balance, let's talk about communal dining, or the syssitia, where every Spartan male was expected to partake. It's not just a meal, it's a social institution. Picture this, a hall filled with men, each bringing their own contributions to the feast, although feast might be a generous term. The idea was to foster camaraderie and equality, ensuring that no one had more or less than their neighbor. The theory, a united front, was an unbreakable one. The reality, a lack of privacy that would drive a modern introvert to madness. Participation in the syssitia was mandatory, and skipping it was a social faux pas that could lead to fines or worse, loss of citizenship. You see, Spartans were all about reinforcing unity and discipline, even during meal times. It's like a team-building exercise, but with less enthusiasm and more boiled pork. And while this setup might sound like a great way to bond over shared hardships, it also meant that individuality was, once again, sacrificed at the altar of collective strength. Now, let's shift gears and tackle the myth of the invincible Spartan warrior. These guys have been glorified in movies, books, and just about every medium that loves a good underdog story. But guess what? They were human, just like you and me, and not immune to the whims of fate and battlefield blunders. Take the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where the Thebans, led by Epaminondas, handed the Spartans a stunning defeat. It was a tactical masterpiece, with Thebes deploying an oblique formation that shattered the Spartan phalanx, proving that even the mightiest can fall. This defeat was more than just a military loss. It was a blow to the Spartan psyche. It exposed vulnerabilities in their supposedly unbeatable system and marked the beginning of their decline. The lesson here: no matter how formidable you are, there's always someone out there with a fresh strategy and a sharper sword. It's a sobering reminder that legends, no matter how grand, are built on the backs of very real, very fallible people. And let's not forget the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE, where a group of Spartans surrendered to the Athenians, something previously thought impassable. This event sent shockwaves through Greece, challenging the notion of Spartan invincibility. It was a stark reminder that while propaganda might paint a picture of unyielding warriors, the truth was far more nuanced. Spartans could be outmaneuvered, outthought, and yes, even outlasted. So, as you sit in the Secession, chewing on that black broth and contemplating your place in this Spartan world, remember that the stories you've heard are just one side of the coin. Sparta's cultural and military prowess was undeniable, but it was also built on a narrative that conveniently swept certain defeats under the rug. In reality, the Spartans were strategic, disciplined, and yes, occasionally fallible. They were masters of their narrative, and perhaps that's their greatest legacy, the ability to craft a story that endures far beyond the battlefield. But don't get too comfortable. The day's only halfway through, and in Sparta, the work is never done. As you digest that hearty bowl of black broth, you might start daydreaming about a siesta. But in Sparta, there's no such thing as a post-lunch lull. The afternoon ushers in a fresh array of challenges designed to test not just your physical mettle, but your psychological grit as well. If you thought the morning was tough, buckle up. Sparta's afternoon drills are a whole new level of rigor. Welcome to the endurance tests, where the line between training and torment gets a little blurry. Want to know what sets Spartan warriors apart? It's their ability to withstand discomfort that would make most of us sprint for the nearest exit. For example, the infamous Platonistas, a bruising contest resembling a proto-rugby match, pits group against group in a battle over a contested island in the Eurotas River. It's all about wrestling and shoving with one goal: knock your rivals off the island and claim victory. No pads, no helmets, just pure, unfiltered grit. And let's not forget the art of pain management, a skill every Spartan boy was expected to master. Take the endurance competition known as the Diamastigosis, where boys were flogged publicly, not for any wrongdoing, mind you, but as a test of Stoic endurance. The winner, the one who could withstand the whip without flinching. This isn't just a sadistic spectacle, it's a rite of passage that underscores the Spartan ideal of toughness over tenderness. You know, just in case the morning's flogging for failed food theft didn't drive that point home. Now, you might be asking, why the obsession with suffering? Well, it's not masochism for its own sake. For Spartans, enduring pain was about proving one's dedication to the state, reinforcing social cohesion through shared hardship. After all, a Spartan's ability to withstand the agony of training translated directly to their effectiveness on the battlefield. When you're locked shoulder to shoulder in a phalanx, knowing the guy next to you can take a hit is worth its weight in iron spits. But here's where things get paradoxical. Despite their love for austerity, Spartans also had a soft spot for the arts, music and dance, to be precise. Yes, you heard right. The same culture that elevates Stoicism to an art form also enjoys a good tune and a jig. Music was integral to Spartan education, believed to cultivate harmony and discipline among warriors. The lyre and flute accompanied their marches, setting the rhythm for both practice and real combat. It's a curious contradiction, a society that preaches simplicity, yet embraces the complex emotional tapestry that music provides. And dance? Oh, they danced. But not in the celebratory, free-spirited manner you might be imagining. Spartan dances were structured, precise, and often martial in nature. Think of it as choreography with a purpose, instilling unity and rhythm that could translate seamlessly to the battlefield. The Gymnopedia, for example, was an annual festival featuring ritualistic dances. It was part art, part athletic competition, and an unyielding display of Spartan discipline. In a way, these cultural practices were just another form of training, nurturing the collective identity that made the Spartan war machine so formidable. Yet, for all their disdain for luxury, Spartans couldn't entirely escape the allure of beauty. Their shields and armor, while functional, were often adorned with intricate designs. The irony: these embellishments served a dual purpose, to intimidate foes and inspire fellow warriors. Even in the stark world of Sparta, there was room for a little flair, so long as it served the greater good. And let's not forget the role of women in this cultural tapestry. Spartan women, unlike their Athenian counterparts, were encouraged to participate in physical training and public festivals. They might not have joined the phalanx, but they supported the war effort by fostering the next generation of soldiers. Their involvement in music and dance wasn't just for entertainment. It was a subtle reinforcement of the Spartan ethos of unity and strength. A society that scorns luxury yet embraces the arts is a complex beast, one that reveals itself in layers, much like their beloved black broth. As the afternoon sun begins to wane, you might catch a glimpse of the Sisisha halls preparing for another round of communal dining. But before you can daydream about dinner, there's more work to be done. The afternoon drills aren't just about endurance, they're a crucible for leadership. Younger Spartans are encouraged to strategize, to lead mock battles that test not just brawn but brains. It's a sandbox of military tactics where the stakes are low, but the lessons are invaluable. Here, a keen mind is as celebrated as a strong arm, an important reminder that Spartan warfare was as much about intellect as it was about might. In this relentless pursuit of excellence, you might wonder where the individual fits into this grand Spartan narrative. The answer, they don't. Not really. Individuality is subsumed by the collective, a sacrifice made for the promise of glory and survival. A Spartan's identity is inextricably linked to their role within the state, a cog in the military-industrial complex of ancient Greece. But before you dismiss them as mindless drones, consider this. Spartans were masters of their narrative. They understood that stories of their invincibility would echo through history, ensuring that they would be remembered not just as warriors, but as legends. And while the afternoon drills may be grueling, they serve a purpose greater than any one individual could achieve alone. They are the building blocks of a society that, for better or worse, has captured the imagination of generations. So as you wrap up your afternoon in Sparta, pondering the paradoxes and ironies of this ancient world, remember that the legend is only part of the story. The reality is a mosaic of discipline, sacrifice, and a touch of audacious flair. The day isn't over yet, but you're starting to see the bigger picture. In Sparta, the line between reality and myth is as thin as the blade of a Spartan sword. And while the afternoon sun may set on another day of drills, the Spartan saga marches on, as relentless and enduring as the warriors themselves. As the Spartan sun dips below the horizon, casting long, warrior-like shadows over the Eurotas River, you might think the day's trials are finally over. Not quite. Evening in Sparta is a time for reflection, but don't expect any cozy fireside chats. Instead, it's about preparing for another day of relentless discipline and devotion to the state. Yet, as you take a breath and contemplate the legacy of this warrior society, you might find yourself questioning the allure of a life so singularly focused on warfare. Let's get real. Modern media has a bit of a Spartan crush. From Hollywood epics to video games, the image of the fearless Spartan warrior is as enduring as it is misleading. Yes, they were formidable fighters, but the Hollywood lens tends to gloss over the gritty details, like the fact that Spartan society was built on the backs of the Helots, a subjugated class. In reality, this so-called utopia of military prowess was less about freedom and more about maintaining a rigid social order that left little room for individual choice. Take those famous Spartan shields, harplans, if you're feeling fancy. They weren't just military gear. They were a metaphor for the society itself. Each shield was crucial to the phalanx, much like every Spartan was to the state. Lose your shield in battle, and you'd better not come home at all. With it or on it, as the Spartan mothers would say, encapsulating a world where personal failure was unacceptable. It's a reminder that Spartan valor came with a hefty price tag, individual sacrifice for collective strength. But hey, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Spartan focus on unity and discipline did yield some impressive feats. For instance, the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, where a small contingent of Spartans held off a vastly larger Persian force, remains a testament to their strategic brilliance. It's the stuff of legends, sure, but it also underscores a harsh truth. Spartans excelled at turning their limitations into strengths. They knew they couldn't match the Persians in numbers, so they outmaneuvered them in tactics. However, as glorious as these moments were, they couldn't stave off decline forever. Enter the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, a watershed moment that dismantled the myth of Spartan invincibility. The Thebans, under Epaminondas, introduced tactical innovations that broke the Spartan phalanx, shattering the illusion of their military supremacy. The loss at Leuctra didn't just cripple Sparta's military, it destabilized their entire social order. It was a classic case of hubris meeting its match, and it marked the beginning of the end for Sparta's dominance. And let's talk about economics, the unglamorous engine that often drives history. Sparta's disdain for currency meant they were economically isolated, a choice that eventually caught up with them. Without the financial flexibility to adapt, they struggled to maintain their military and social structures. Meanwhile, their neighbors were busy trading, innovating, and generally moving with the times, leaving Sparta stuck in its iron-spit past. So, what broader lessons can we draw from this ancient society? Well, for starters, even the mightiest can fall when they cling too tightly to tradition. Sparta's refusal to evolve, coupled with its rigid social hierarchy, left it vulnerable to the changing tides of history. Yet, their commitment to discipline and unity is a lesson in itself, albeit one that came at the expense of personal freedom and innovation. In the end, the allure of Sparta lies in its contradictions, a society that was as much about its legends as its realities. They were warriors, yes, but also poets and musicians, masters of a narrative that has endured for millennia. And while their way of life might seem alien to us, it's a fascinating study in how humans strive for greatness, often at great cost. As you wrap up your day in this formidable city-state, it's clear why you probably wouldn't last 24 hours in ancient Sparta. The relentless discipline, the communal living, the stark meals. It's a far cry from the comfort of your couch and Netflix queue. But in reflecting on Sparta's achievements and failures, there's a lesson in balance. The need to adapt, to cherish individuality within community, and to understand that even the strongest walls can crumble if they don't bend with the winds of change. So, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps on that unyielding wooden plank, remember that history is a tapestry of triumphs and trials. Sparta's legacy is woven with both, a testament to human endurance and the ever-persistent march of progress. Sweet dreams, and don't let the heartlands bite. Byzantium entered the Russian scene with all the subtlety of a peacock at a penguin party. Picture the Byzantine Empire, the swaggering cultural powerhouse of the medieval world, strutting into the austere lands of what would become Russia. This wasn't just any meet and greet. It was more like a high-stakes blind date, where one side showed up with silk robes, and the other with, well, a lot of hide and fur. Our story kicks off along the bustling Varangian Way, an ancient trade route that stretched over 2,000 miles from the icy Scandinavian north through the Slavic lands, all the way to the opulent heart of Byzantium. Think of it as the medieval version of the Silk Road, but with more beards and fewer camels. This route wasn't just about moving goods. It was the medieval superhighway for culture, ideas, and the occasional bit of intrigue. The Varangians, those Viking-esque traders and warriors with a penchant for longboats and long beards, paddled these waters, bargaining their way down to the Black Sea like it was the medieval equivalent of a stock exchange. What really put the sparkle in the eyes of the future Russian elite were the Byzantine goods that floated down this route. We're talking about silks so fine they could slip through a ring, spices that could make even the blandest medieval stew sing, and a host of other luxury items that screamed, "I have arrived," louder than any medieval town crier. The Byzantines knew how to flaunt their bling, and the Russians were more than a little envious. Who wouldn't be? It's like seeing your neighbor roll up in a gold-plated chariot while you're still figuring out how to tame your donkey. But let's not kid ourselves. The logistics of moving these precious goods were nothing short of a medieval nightmare. Transporting silks and spices over this vast distance was like trying to run a marathon in chain mail. The Varangian traders had to navigate treacherous rivers, avoid bands of marauding bandits, and endure the ever-present threat of Byzantine customs officials with a penchant for heavy taxation. And those taxes, they were as eye-watering as the spices themselves. We're talking about levies that could easily reach 10% to 15% of the value of goods, a steep price for the privilege of trading in the shadow of Byzantium's golden domes. The cost of these luxuries didn't just stop at taxes. The journey itself was a financial gauntlet. Feeding a crew of hungry Norsemen with a taste for meat wasn't cheap, and the upkeep of those sleek longboats required constant resources. Each trip to Byzantium was a gamble, where a single storm or an ill-timed bandit raid could wipe out months of planning and investment. Yet, despite these risks, the allure of Byzantine treasures kept the Varangians coming back for more, like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, back in the fledgling Russian territories, these Byzantine imports sparked a cultural and economic transformation. The Russian elite, eager to emulate their more sophisticated southern neighbors, began to adopt Byzantine styles in everything from clothing to architecture. The desire to match Byzantium's grandeur became a driving force behind the burgeoning Russian identity. It was as if the Russian princes had taken one look at the Byzantine emperor's bling and said, "We'll have what he's having. But let's not romanticize it too much. For every silk robe that made it to the Russian courts, there were countless others that ended up torn, stained, or simply vanished along the way. And those spices, as precious as they were, often arrived mixed with a generous helping of medieval dirt. The reality was a far cry from the polished allure of Constantinople's markets, yet the influence of these goods was unmistakable. So, as Byzantium strutted its stuff, and the Varangians rode their way into the annals of history, something remarkable was happening. The seeds of a cultural revolution were being sown, one silk thread and spice grain at a time. This grand introduction of Byzantine culture into the Russian scene was just the beginning, a tantalizing prelude to a much deeper and more complex relationship that would shape the course of Russian history for centuries to come. But the Byzantine allure was just the appetizer. The political intrigue was the main course. If the Varangian way was a superhighway for trade, then the Byzantine court was a chessboard, where emperors and princes played with real kingdoms as their pawns. Forget HBO. This was the original power game. Let's dive into a story that has more twists and turns than a Byzantine mosaic. So, who was the star player on this grand stage of diplomacy and drama? Enter Vladimir the Great, Prince of Novgorod, Grand Prince of Kiev, and a master of public relations centuries before the term existed. Vladimir knew that to elevate Kievan Rus from a collection of rowdy principalities into a cohesive powerhouse, he needed more than just furs and firewood. He needed religion, specifically, a religion that would align his rule with the grandeur of Byzantium. Now, here's where the story gets juicy. In 988, Vladimir took the plunge, quite literally. He was baptized and declared Christianity the official religion of his realm. It wasn't just a spiritual awakening. It was a strategic masterstroke. By embracing Byzantine Christianity, Vladimir effectively hitched his wagon to one of the most powerful empires of the time. It was like upgrading from a wooden club to a diamond-encrusted scepter overnight. But let's not kid ourselves about Vladimir's motivations. This wasn't just a soul-saving exercise. It was a calculated move to consolidate power. By adopting Christianity, Vladimir could unify his people under one faith, while simultaneously cozying up to the Byzantine Empire. His baptism was less about celestial salvation and more about terrestrial domination. It was a power play that would make even the most cunning of modern politicians nod in respect. Now, as with any good story, there's a twist. Vladimir's conversion came with a side of marital diplomacy. To seal the deal with Byzantium, he married Anna Porphyrogenita, the sister of the Byzantine Emperor Basil Roman II. This wasn't a simple exchange of vows. It was a high-stakes alliance that would have made the Lannisters blush. Marrying into the Byzantine imperial family was like getting an exclusive backstage pass to the concert of the century. It gave Vladimir legitimacy, prestige, and access to the Byzantine playbook. Plus, marrying into the purple-born lineage was like winning the medieval lottery. Anna herself was no pawn. She was a political powerhouse whose presence in Kiev turned it into a mini-Constantinople. But wait, there's more to this medieval soap opera. Vladimir's baptism wasn't just a personal affair, it was a mass spectacle. He ordered the entire population of Kiev to wade into the Dnieper River and follow his lead. Picture this. Thousands of Kievan Rus citizens standing knee-deep in water, shivering not just from the cold, but from the shock of sudden religious transformation. It was a scene that screamed, "Resistance is futile," with a side of divine intervention. Now, let's talk about the aftermath of this grand baptism. The introduction of Byzantine Christianity into Kievan Rus was like throwing a cultural hand grenade into the mix. Churches sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. adorned with icons and frescoes that brought a splash of Byzantine color to the northern gloom. The Cyrillic script, developed by Byzantine missionaries Cyril and Methodius, became the alphabetic lifeline that connected the Slavic world to the celestial and the scholarly, and the Russian Orthodox Church. It took root and grew with a fervor that would ensure its place as a cornerstone of Russian identity. But don't be fooled by the glossy veneer of conversion. The adoption of Christianity was as much about control as it was about faith. By aligning with Byzantium, Vladimir gained a powerful ally in his quest to centralize power. The Byzantine model of Caesaropapism, where the emperor wielded both political and religious authority, was a template Vladimir was more than happy to replicate. This wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was about consolidating power and ensuring the prince's rule was as unassailable as the walls of Constantinople. And let's not forget the economic angle. The Christianization of Kievan Rus opened new channels for trade and diplomacy. With religion smoothing the way, merchants and diplomats flowed between Kiev and Constantinople like vodka at a Russian wedding. Byzantine artisans and architects were imported to beautify the burgeoning capital, their skills adding a touch of imperial splendor to Kiev's skyline. The economic boon from this cultural exchange was like hitting the jackpot at a Byzantine bazaar. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this religious shift. The old pagan gods didn't go down without a fight, and neither did their followers. The transition to Christianity was a rocky road, marked by resistance and rebellion from those who clung to the old ways. Pagan temples were torn down, idols smashed, and rituals stamped out with the zeal of a convert impressing his new in-laws. It was a cultural upheaval that reshaped the landscape of Kievan Rus, not unlike a tectonic shift. So, as Byzantine Christianity spread its wings over Kievan Rus, Vladimir the Great secured his legacy as the man who brought the light of Byzantium to the north. Yet, beneath the glow of religious icons and the echo of church bells, the real story was one of power, politics, and pragmatism. It was a tale where faith was wielded as a tool of statecraft, and alliances were forged as much in the baptismal font as on the battlefield. As we leave Vladimir and his newly baptized realm, remember this. History might remember the saints and the sinners, but it's the strategists like Vladimir who leave the most indelible marks. With Byzantium's blessing, Kievan Rus was set on a path that would shape the course of Russian history for centuries. The chessboard of medieval politics had been set, and the game was just beginning. The Byzantine influence was like a slow-burning fuse, ready to ignite a cultural and political transformation that would echo down the ages. But that's a story for another day. Keep your ears open and your eyes peeled. There's more intrigue and maneuvering to come. As the Byzantine influence unfurled over Kievan Rus like a particularly luxurious carpet, the cultural ripple effects were nothing short of seismic. Suddenly, the architectural landscape of the Russian territories began to resemble an Eastern Orthodox dreamscape. Forget your humble wooden huts. The new architectural ambition was all about domes, arches, and enough iconography to make your head spin faster than a cathedral bell. These churches weren't just buildings. They were status symbols, the medieval equivalent of a blue checkmark on Twitter. The Byzantine style was about as subtle as a gold-plated chariot, with onion domes that seemed to defy gravity and mosaics that sparkled with 1,000 stories. The Hagia Sophia in Constantinople set the gold standard, quite literally, and the Russians were eager to emulate it. St. Sophia's Cathedral in Kiev was one such nod to its Byzantine cousin, a shining example of how to say, "We've arrived," without uttering a single word. But let's not pretend this architectural renaissance was a walk in the park. Imagine the challenge. Importing Byzantine artisans who spoke a different language and were suddenly tasked with educating local builders who thought mosaic was a fancy word for confusing jigsaw puzzle. The Byzantine craftsmen were like rock stars on a world tour, complete with demanding requests and an entourage of confusion. It wasn't just about sharing skills. It was about bridging a cultural chasm wider than the Dnieper River. Here's the kicker. This wasn't a smooth transition. The reality of importing Byzantine culture wholesale was more akin to receiving a DIY kit with instructions in Greek and a few screws missing. Russian artisans, who previously specialized in wooden structures, were now expected to work with stone and mosaics, a bit like asking a baker to whip up a soufflé with a rolling pin and a dream. The learning curve was steeper than the domes they were building. The economic implications of this architectural evolution were as complex as a Byzantine fresco. The cost of importing artisans and materials was like a medieval Kickstarter campaign gone wrong, where every backer expected a piece of the action. The price of this cultural import was steep, and not just in monetary terms. Byzantine architects demanded salaries that could rival the most daring trade expeditions, and they came with a list of demands longer than a Byzantine liturgy. The local economy stretched under the pressure, with resources diverted to these grand projects that could have funded an army or two. Now, let's pivot to the myth of the Third Rome, an idea that Russia, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, was the rightful heir to the mantle of the Roman Empire. It's a narrative as enticing as it is oversimplified. Moscow as the Third Rome was a bold claim, akin to declaring yourself the next great pop star after one karaoke session. The allure of this notion lay in its promise of prestige and power, a historical fairy tale that cast Russia as the torchbearer of Orthodox Christianity and Roman imperial legacy. But here's the rub. The Third Rome concept was more aspirational than actual, a vision that prioritized grandiosity over gritty reality. Sure, the church bells echoed with Byzantine melodies, and the priests donned robes that would make even the most extravagant Byzantine bishops blush. But the political and economic foundations were less like the solid stone of Constantinople's walls and more like the shifting sands of a Russian winter. The Third Rome was in many ways a clever piece of branding by the Russian Orthodox Church and the Tsars, a bid for legitimacy and continuity in a world that had seen empires rise and fall like waves on the Black Sea. It was a narrative that glossed over the complexities and challenges of maintaining such an empire, not unlike trying to keep a Byzantine mosaic intact during an earthquake. The myth had its appeal, but the reality on the ground was far messier and less romantic. So, as the Byzantine influence wove its way into the fabric of Russian society, it was a tale of both triumph and turbulence. The architectural wonders that emerged were testaments to ambition and cultural fusion, yet they were also monuments to the challenges of adaptation and assimilation. The promise of the Third Rome lingered like a dream, a tantalizing vision that inspired generations but never quite matched the lived experience. The Byzantine cultural legacy in Russia was like a grand tapestry, vibrant and intricate, but with threads that frayed and unraveled in unexpected ways. As Russian society absorbed these influences, it wasn't just about adopting a style. It was about redefining identity in the shadow of a fallen empire. The Byzantine dream was a double-edged sword, offering both inspiration and a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. As we continue to unravel this tale, remember that history is less about the perfection of the past and more about the people who dared to shape it. The Byzantine influence on Russian culture was a journey of innovation and adaptation, a story that continues to echo through the ages. And while the myth of the Third Rome may have been more smoke and mirrors than stone and mortar, its legacy is a testament to the power of dreams to shape reality. But let's save the rest of that story for another day. There's so much more to uncover. Stay tuned, because the plot is just thickening. Now that we've set the stage with Byzantine bling and religious maneuvers, let's pivot to the military exchanges that were more than just generals swapping war stories over a cup of kvass. Imagine the Byzantine Empire, a seasoned old hand at warfare, sharing its military playbook with the eager, yet slightly chaotic, forces of Kievan Rus. It's like watching a master chef hand over a cherished recipe to a cook who's more comfortable throwing ingredients in a pot and hoping for the best. Enter the Byzantine military manuals, the medieval equivalent of a top-secret dossier. These weren't your average bedtime reading. They were detailed guides on how to wage war with the precision and flair of a Byzantine general. The manuals, known as strategikon, were packed with tactical wisdom, covering everything from troop formations to psychological warfare. They were practically the medieval version of Sun Tzu's Art of War, but with more references to Eastern Orthodox saints. When these manuals made their way into the hands of the Kievan Rus, it was like handing a Formula One car to someone used to driving a horse and cart. The Byzantine tactics were intricate and required a level of coordination that the Rus weren't exactly known for. The Rus warriors were famed for their ferocity and brute strength, but precision, that was a whole new ballgame. The manuals preached discipline and strategy over raw power, a concept as foreign to the Rus as a Byzantine silk robe at a Norse feast. One particular gem from these manuals was the emphasis on cavalry tactics. The Byzantines were masters of mounted warfare, using their cavalry like a scalpel on the battlefield. The Rus, meanwhile, were more accustomed to charging in with axes swinging, a method effective for intimidation, but less so for strategic victories. The manuals introduced the idea of using cavalry for flanking maneuvers, a tactic that required practice, skill, and a horse that didn't decide to bolt at the first sign of trouble. But let's not kid ourselves. This cross-cultural military boot camp was about as straightforward as herding cats. Language barriers aside, the Byzantine instructors faced the challenge of teaching Rus warriors who were more interested in the thrill of battle than the intricacies of tactical formations. Picture a Byzantine officer trying to explain the finer points of military strategy to a room full of Rus chiefs who'd rather discuss the merits of their latest raid. It was a logistical nightmare, akin to organizing a wedding where half the guests speak in riddles. Despite these challenges, the Byzantine influence did leave its mark on Rus warfare, albeit in fits and starts. Over time, the Rus began to incorporate more sophisticated tactics, blending their natural aggression with a touch of Byzantine finesse. It was a bit like watching a rock band learn to play a symphony, not always harmonious, but certainly interesting. The economic implications of these military exchanges were not lost on the Rus leaders, who saw the potential for increased power and territory. The Byzantine manuals offered a roadmap to more effective warfare, which in turn promised greater spoils and expansion. The cost of training and equipping troops in this new style was significant, but the potential rewards were enticing. It was a gamble, like putting your last coin on a roulette table, hoping for the big win. Now, let's take a moment to debunk the myth that these military exchanges were all about noble strategy and honorable combat. Sure, the manuals were filled with lofty ideals, but the reality on the ground was often more brutal. The Rus warriors were notorious for their ruthless tactics, and while the Byzantine manuals might have advocated for more refined warfare, the Rus had their own interpretation. It was less about chivalry and more about winning by any means necessary. The manuals served as a guide, but in the heat of battle, old habits died hard. This blending of Byzantine strategy with Rus ferocity created a unique military culture, one that would leave a lasting impact on the region. It was a fusion of finesse and force, a testament to the power of cultural exchange even in the brutal arena of warfare. The Byzantine influence was like a whisper in the ear of the Rus commanders, urging them to think before they swung, to plan before they charged. It was a lesson in restraint, albeit one that took time to sink in. So, as the Byzantine military wisdom seeped into the bones of Rus warfare, it was more than just a tactical upgrade. It was a cultural exchange that reshaped the battlefield, a meeting of minds that transcended the clash of swords. The Rus warriors, armed with their newfound knowledge, were like a storm on the horizon, unpredictable, powerful, and now, just a little bit more strategic. The Byzantine manuals had done their work, setting the stage for a new era of Rus warfare. And as we leave the dusty fields of medieval battle behind, keep in mind that history is as much about the exchange of ideas as it is about the clash of armies. The Byzantine influence on Rus military practices was a dance of culture and conflict, a reminder that even amidst the chaos of war, there is room for learning and adaptation. With the Byzantine playbook in hand, the Rus were ready to write their own chapters in the annals of history, a story that was far from over. Stay tuned, because the next act in this grand historical saga is just around the corner. And now, dear history buffs, it's time to swap the battlefield for the courtroom, as we unravel how Byzantine influence seeped into the legal and governance systems of Russia like a particularly potent ink stain on a parchment. If you thought Byzantine bling was all about fashion and war, think again. The Byzantine legacy in law and governance was a meticulous weaving of order amidst chaos, a little like organizing a library in a hurricane. First off, let's talk about the Yaroslav's Law Code, or Russkaya Pravda, which sounds like a spin-off of a legal drama, but was more of a medieval guidebook for justice. Yaroslav the Wise, who ruled from 1019 to 1054, took a leaf out of the Byzantine playbook, or should I say scroll, and crafted a legal system that was part Roman efficiency, part Slavic pragmatism. He didn't just scribble a few notes. This was a comprehensive overhaul. It laid down rules on everything from property rights to the fines for theft, which were more detailed than a Byzantine mosaic. Let's bust a myth right off the bat. This wasn't just a clean copy-paste job from Byzantine law. The Russkaya Pravda had its own flair, incorporating local customs with a Byzantine twist. Think of it as a fusion dish, combining the best of both culinary worlds. The fines, for instance, were payable in grivnas, a silver currency that was as heavy in weight as it was in symbolism. The penalties weren't just about punishment. They were about maintaining order in a society where personal feuds could escalate faster than you could say Byzantine bureaucracy. And speaking of currency, let's not ignore the economic implications. The introduction of a standardized legal system was a boon for trade, as merchants from Novgorod to Constantinople could now navigate a more predictable legal landscape. This was no small feat in a time when disagreements could be settled with a sword as easily as with a handshake. The legal framework provided a sense of stability, encouraging trade routes to flourish like vines in a Byzantine vineyard. Now, onto language. If you've ever marveled at the Cyrillic script and thought it was just a quirky alphabet, think again. It was a linguistic game-changer, crafted by the Byzantine missionaries Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century, designed to convert the Slavs to Christianity. This wasn't just about spreading the good word. It was about creating a written language that could unite disparate tribes under a single religious and cultural umbrella. The Cyrillic script was like a set of linguistic training wheels, guiding the Eastern Slavs into the world of written communication. But hold onto your hats, because the transition to Cyrillic wasn't all smooth sailing. Imagine teaching a population used to oral tradition how to read and write. It was akin to introducing a smartphone to a caveman. While the script opened the door to religious texts and administrative records, literacy rates were still as low as a Byzantine basement. The script's initial impact was limited, trickling down from the elite like fine Byzantine silk to the masses, who were still grappling with the concept of a written word. Switching gears to governance, Byzantine influence was like a sophisticated software update for the Kievan Rus leadership. The idea of a centralized, autocratic rule was a concept the Byzantines had down to a fine art, and it was a model the Russian princes found particularly appealing. The Byzantine emperor, who ruled with divine right, was an image the Rus princes aspired to. It wasn't just about power. It was about divine legitimacy, a holy sanction that made their rule as unassailable as the Hagia Sophia. Yet the reality was far messier. The Russian principalities were more like a patchwork quilt than a unified empire, each prince more interested in his own backyard than in a grand Byzantine vision. Infighting was as common as Byzantine tax collectors, and the idea of a seamless, centralized governance was more fiction than fact. The Byzantine influence was there, but the execution was as chaotic as a Byzantine bazaar during a sale. Fast forward to modern times, and you'll still find echoes of Byzantium in Russia's corridors of power. The Russian Orthodox Church, with its Byzantine roots, remains a potent force, influencing everything from politics to social norms. The architecture, too, continues to channel its inner Byzantium, with domes and frescoes that are as much about aesthetics as they are about declaring cultural heritage. And let's not forget the legal system, which still carries vestiges of its Byzantine origins, a testament to the empire's enduring legacy. In the end, the Byzantine influence on Russia was like a grand tapestry, rich and complex, with threads that sometimes tangled but never broke. It was a legacy that shaped law, language, and governance, leaving an indelible mark that reverberates even today. The romantic notion of a seamless blend of cultures is just that, a notion. The reality was a bumpy road, full of trials and errors, but one that ultimately led to a unique cultural synthesis. So, next time you hear the church bells echo or see the glint of a golden dome in the Russian skyline, remember the Byzantine legacy that helped shape this vast and varied land. It's a history of ambition and adaptation, of blending the old with the new, and of a cultural exchange that was as challenging as it was rewarding. And as we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, let's take a moment to appreciate the complex tapestry of influences that continue to shape our world today. Your eyelids flutter open, and surprise, surprise, it's dawn. No snooze button, no warm cup of joe to greet you. Just a rooster somewhere in the village, reminding you that sleeping in is a luxury reserved for, well, no one in this medieval world. You're a farmer living in a village circa 1300, which means your day starts with the sun whether you like it or not. And let's be honest, this early bird routine isn't exactly optional when your livelihood depends on the whims of Mother Nature. You roll out of your straw-stuffed mattress, if that's not too generous a term, and take a moment to rub the sleep from your eyes. The air in your one-room home is cold, but hey, at least you don't have to worry about paying a heating bill. Your stomach rumbles, but breakfast isn't the bacon and eggs affair you might dream about. Nope, it's more like a slice of yesterday's bread, maybe with a smear of lard if you're feeling fancy. Forget about coffee. That exotic brew won't hit Europe for another couple of centuries. As you head outside, the sun peeks over the horizon, casting a golden hue on your small plot of land. It's enough to make even the most hardened medieval soul pause for a moment, though you're quickly reminded of the day's work ahead. Your village operates on an agrarian economy, which means your life revolves around the land. You're part of a system more finely tuned than a Swiss watch, or at least that's the idea. Welcome to the three-field system, the medieval innovation that lets you rotate crops to keep your soil from being as exhausted as you are. Here's the gist. Your fields are divided into three parts. One's planted with wheat, another with barley, and the third. It gets a well-deserved rest. This system isn't just some medieval whimsy. It's a clever way to prevent soil depletion and increase productivity. It's like crop yoga, stretching the soil's potential while keeping it limber. As you grab your plow, which is essentially a sturdy bit of wood with an iron tip, you realize just how much human innovation it takes to get food from field to table. In your case, the table is more of a wooden board balanced on your knees, but let's not get bogged down in semantics. You're thankful for your oxen, your four-legged partners in this agricultural dance. They might not win any prizes for speed, but their strength is what keeps your family fed. You're planting wheat today, the medieval staple food that might not be gluten-free but sure is essential. This golden grain is the backbone of your diet, used to make everything from bread to, well, more bread. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of kale. Everyone's growing it, and it's in everything. The yield varies, but you're hoping for about 600 kilograms per hectare, enough to keep your family from experiencing the joys of famine season. While you guide the plow through the soil, you can't help but think about the bigger picture. You're part of a feudal system where land is king, and you're a mere serf on this chessboard. Your landlord, a fellow who sees more of his reflection in a mirror than he does a field of wheat, owns the land you work. In return for your labor, you get to keep some of what you grow, and importantly, avoid the pointy end of a sword. Sure, it's a raw deal, but when the alternative is a life of vagrancy or a swift kick to the head by a knight's horse, you make do. As the sun climbs higher, you take a break and survey the landscape. Villages like yours dart the medieval world, each a microcosm of the larger economic machine. There's a simplicity to it all. Your success is tied to the earth beneath your feet, weather above your head, and the feudal lord who could make you pack your bags on a whim. It's a precarious balance, and yet somehow it works. Mostly. Nearby, other villagers are going about their business. The craftsmen, those lucky ducks, are just waking up. They don't have to deal with the back-breaking labor of farming, focusing instead on their trades. But don't get too envious. If you're a blacksmith, you'd be spending your days in a sweltering workshop, hammering out horseshoes and tools. Each profession has its own set of challenges, but at least you get to enjoy the fresh air and open fields, right? After another few hours of ploughing, your body aching in ways modern folks can only imagine, it's time to head back to your home for a quick lunch. This is where the romantic notion of a simpler time gets a reality check. Your meal is more of the same. Bread, maybe some cheese if you're lucky, and water from the village well. No farm-to-table dining here, just farm-to-mouth practicality. As you munch on your humble fare, you reflect on the agrarian economy that defines your life. It's a world where every seed you plant is a gamble, each harvest a roll of the dice. There's no insurance policy for a bad season, no bailout if the crops fail. Yet, despite the odds, and perhaps because of them, you find a certain satisfaction in the toil. This is your world, for better or worse, and you'll take it one sunrise at a time. Finishing your frugal lunch, you toss a wistful glance toward the village center, where the craftsmen are already at work. The clang of hammers and the rhythm of looms echo through the air, a symphony of industry that hints at a life less dirty than yours. But don't be fooled by the melodic allure of the artisan's world. It's not all about creating beautiful things while sipping on medieval lattes. No, these folks are the backbone of your medieval economy, and their lives are as gritty as the soot that clings to their clothes. Let's take a stroll into the heart of the village, where the blacksmith is the rock star of the medieval workshop scene. His domain is a furnace-lit den of chaos, where the temperature rivals the hardest gossip at the local tavern. This guy's got a pivotal role, hammering out everything from nails to knight's armor. And those horseshoes, they're not just for luck. They're essential for keeping the nobility steeds from hobbling around like a clumsy uncle at a wedding dance. The blacksmith's craft demands brawn and brains, an ironclad combo, if you will. It's a sweaty job, with temperatures reaching upwards of 500 degrees Celsius. You can almost feel the heat just standing there, but it's the sound that gets you. Metal on metal, ringing through the air like the world's angriest church bell. And yet, despite this indispensable work, our friend the blacksmith isn't exactly swimming in silver coins. He's part of the guild system, a medieval precursor to the trade union, which regulates who can do what and how much they can charge. Think of it as the ultimate old boys club, with a side of economic protectionism. Guilds are a mixed bag. Sure, they provide quality control. No one wants shardy chainmail when you're up against a marauding band of brigands. But they also keep a tight lid on innovation. You can't exactly go freelance in this world. Want to invent a new type of plow or hammer? Better get permission from the guild, or you're out of luck. Social mobility in the guild system is about as flexible as a suit of armor. And while you'd think that talent would let you climb the ranks, it's more about who you know than what you can do. Sound familiar? Moving down the street, we find the carpenter's workshop. This guy is the unsung hero of medieval life, crafting everything from furniture to tools with precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker nod approvingly. His tools are simple yet effective: saws, planes, chisels, and a healthy dose of patience. Working with wood isn't just about making pretty things, though. It's about ensuring roofs don't cave in and carts don't collapse. Yet, as essential as his work is, the carpenter's life is far from glamorous. Long hours and modest paychecks keep him firmly in the working class, despite the critical nature of his craft. And then there's the weaver, whose looms clatter rhythmically like medieval drum machines. This is textile central, where raw wool and flax get transformed into the fabrics that clothe everyone from peasants to princes. The weaver's skills are in demand, but again, we're dealing with a guild system that keeps everyone in their lane. You don't just decide to start weaving one day. You apprentice, train, and if you're lucky, maybe one day you'll run your own shop. Until then, it's long days and cramped quarters, with your economic prospects as threadbare as the rags you started with. What's fascinating, and let's be real, a bit frustrating, is the romanticism we often slap onto these professions. There's this myth that medieval craftsmen lived a creatively fulfilling life, making bespoke goods while enjoying a leisurely pace that modern folks can only dream of. In reality, the working conditions would make a modern-day sweatshop look like a spa retreat. It's back-breaking work, and while there's a certain artistry to it, the reality is more about survival than self-expression. Now, let's talk about the local markets, where all these goods eventually make their way. Picture a bustling scene of stalls and haggling, with goods changing hands faster than gossip at a royal court. These markets are the economic lifeblood of the village, creating a symbiotic relationship between farmers, craftsmen, and traders. It's a place where you can trade a bushel of wheat for a new pair of shoes, or, if you're the bartering type, maybe a favor for a favor. You might think these markets are quaint little hubs of commerce, but they're as cutthroat as any stock exchange. Get your pricing wrong, and you'll be left holding a bag of unsold grain, or worse, a reputation for bad business. Economically speaking, these markets are a microcosm of medieval society's broader systems. They're where supply meets demand, where the local economy feels the ripples of larger political waves. You might be haggling over a sack of flour, but the price you pay is influenced by everything from the latest royal decree to the outcome of a skirmish hundreds of miles away. Globalization before globalization was even a thing, you bet. As you walk through the market, you can't help but think about the layers of complexity that underpin this supposedly simple village life. The craftsmen, with their specialized skills and tightly regulated guilds, might seem like relics of a bygone era, but in many ways, they're dealing with the same economic forces and social structures we wrestle with today. They're craftsmen, yes, but also players in a game that hasn't changed as much as we'd like to think. And so, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, you find yourself pondering the intricacies of this medieval microcosm. The farmers, the craftsmen, the traders, they all play their part in a dance as old as time itself. It's a world of hard work and harder realities, where every day is a new chapter in a story as intricate as the finest tapestry. And while the romance of the past can be alluring, it's the gritty details that make it truly fascinating. As the sun dips lower, casting a golden glow over the bustling market, you wander through the layers of village life, each one more complex than the last. Now, let's zoom out a bit and get into the nitty-gritty of the social hierarchy. Imagine a pyramid, not the Egyptian kind with mummies and curses, but one built on feudal obligations and land ownership. At the top sits the lord, the big cheese of the village, though he's more often found gallivanting at a distant castle than mingling with the locals. This guy holds the deeds to the land, which means he can make or break your medieval day with a flick of his quill. Despite the glossy title, being a lord isn't all feasts and jousting tournaments. Sure, he gets the lion's share of the harvest and can summon knights like medieval Uber drivers, but he's also responsible for protecting the village from marauding bandits and rival lords. It's a position that requires keeping one eye on the peasantry and the other on potential invaders. If you think office politics are bad, try balancing loyalty with the ever-present threat of betrayal. Beneath the lord, we have the reeve, who's like the village middle management. Appointed by the peasants, but often in the lord's pocket, the reeve keeps the gears turning. He's the go-to guy for disputes, the one who makes sure everyone pays their dues, kind of like a medieval IRS agent, but less loved. His role is to ensure the smooth operation of the manor, collecting rents, organizing work details, and occasionally doling out justice. The reeve is the unsung hero of the village, a diplomatic chameleon who knows when to wield authority and when to blend into the background. Then there's the rest of the peasantry, the folks who actually make the village tick. They're like the thousands of little gears in a watch, each one essential yet easily overlooked. These are the serfs and villeins, bound to the land in a system that's as rigid as the armor their lords don on the battlefield. While they technically have some rights, freedom isn't on the menu. Their lives are a series of obligations, from working their own plots to toiling on the lord's demesne and the penalty for slacking. Let's just say it involves fewer stocks and more stocks of a different kind. In this feudal dance, everyone knows their part, but let's not pretend it's a smooth waltz. It's more like a chaotic line dance with occasional sword fights and a soundtrack of groaning peasants. And speaking of swords, let's talk chivalry. Ah, chivalry, the stuff of legend, right? Knights in shining armor, rescuing damsels and slaying dragons. Except the reality is less Arthurian romance and more Game of Thrones intrigue. Knights are indeed bound by a code, but it's a code with more loopholes than a modern tax return. It's all about loyalty to the lord, prowess in battle, and ideally protecting the weak. In practice, it's as selective as the village gossip, applied when convenient and ignored when not. The myth of chivalry is enchanting, but the truth is, knights are human too, often more concerned with their own glory and land acquisition than courtly love. For every tale of noble deeds, there's a story of a knight plundering a rival's lands or getting embroiled in political machinations that would make Machiavelli blush. The ever-present threat of conflict looms large, coloring every interaction with the potential for violence. If peace is the goal, then war is the method, and the village security is always on a knife's edge. Peasant life under this system. Let's just say it's not exactly the dream. The medieval village might look idyllic from the outside, but step inside, and you'll find a world where every action is dictated by duty. The serfs are tethered to the land, their lives a cycle of planting, harvesting, and paying dues. The work is grueling, the rewards meager, and the chance of upward mobility about as likely as a woolly mammoth walking through the village square. Yet, within this rigid framework, there's a strange kind of stability. The Lord provides protection, the reeve ensures order, and the peasants know their place in the grand scheme. It's a system that works, albeit imperfectly, holding the village together even as the world outside threatens to tear it apart. The social contract is unspoken yet deeply ingrained, a testament to the human capacity for endurance in the face of adversity. So, as the day marches on, and you find yourself back in the fields or at the loom, you can't help but ponder the layers of power that define your existence. The Lord, the reeve, the knight, they are all pieces in a puzzle that shapes your world. It's a hierarchy that's both constraining and comforting, a medieval balancing act that leaves little room for error but plenty of room for intrigue. As the afternoon shadows stretch across the village, you realize that life here is a constant negotiation between hope and hardship. It's a world where the promise of chivalry is as alluring as it is unattainable, and where the daily grind is punctuated by moments of unexpected grace. The village is a microcosm of a larger feudal tapestry, each thread woven with care, yet always at risk of unraveling. And as you look around at your fellow villagers, each one playing their part in this grand medieval play, you can't help but wonder what the next act will bring. As the sun dips further into its descent, casting long shadows over the village, your attention turns to the communal heart of medieval life, the church. Ah, the church, a cornerstone of the village both literally and metaphorically. It's where the spiritual meets the social, and where even the most hardened farmer finds a moment of reflection. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This isn't just a Sunday affair. The church's influence permeates every corner of your life, from the cradle to the grave, often with a detour through the confessional. First off, let's address the role of religion in this medieval tapestry. Christianity isn't just a belief system. It's the social glue that binds the village together. Forget about Netflix or social media. Your weekly dose of community drama comes from the church, whether it's through sermons or the latest gossip exchanged after Mass. It's the spiritual equivalent of a medieval town hall meeting, where issues are addressed, and more importantly, where you get your fill of who's feuding with whom. Now, you're probably picturing grand cathedrals with stained glass windows depicting saints and angels. Right, not quite. In your typical village, the church is more likely a modest stone building, sometimes with a thatched roof if funds are tight. Think more rustic charm than architectural marvel. Yet, for all its simplicity, it's the most significant structure around, both in size and in importance. It's where you'll find the village priest, the man with a heart line to guard, and by extension, a finger on the pulse of the village. The priest's role is a curious mix of spiritual leader and local influencer. He's responsible for delivering sermons, officiating weddings, and making sure you don't stray too far from the path of righteousness. But let's not pretend it's all incense and holy water. This guy's also got a keen eye for tithes. Yes, that's right. 10% of your hard-earned produce goes straight to the church. It's the medieval equivalent of a subscription fee for spiritual services, but with a more eternal warranty. Now, let's talk about festivals. These are the medieval equivalent of a music festival, minus the overpriced merchandise and questionable camping facilities. Religious festivals are a highlight of village life, offering a break from the daily grind and a chance to let your hair down, or at least as much as your feudal obligations will allow. These events are tied to the liturgical calendar, with major saints' feast days and holidays like Easter and Christmas giving you a reason to celebrate. Imagine a mix of solemn processions, hearty feasting, and of course, a bit of merrymaking that might have the priest raising an eyebrow. But here's where we debunk a myth or two. While it's tempting to picture these festivals as serene and deeply spiritual, the reality is more like a medieval block party. Sure, there's the religious aspect, but it's also about community bonding and, let's face it, a bit of revelry. Ale flows a little more freely, and the line between piety and party blurs as the day goes on. And why not? After months of toil, a little celebration is a welcome respite. Now, let's pivot to the monks, those paragons of monastic austerity. The romantic image of monks living in self-imposed isolation, dedicating their lives to prayer and contemplation, is a half-truth at best. True, they are the keepers of knowledge, spending hours copying manuscripts and preserving the wisdom of the ancients. But it's not all solemn vows and asceticism. Monasteries are economic powerhouses, controlling vast swaths of land and resources. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a multinational corporation, but with more chanting and fewer board meetings. Monasteries often own the best land, employing local labor to work it. This isn't just a spiritual enterprise, it's big business. While monks are known for their vows of poverty, the monastic lifestyle is more comfortable than you might imagine. Sure, they're not rolling in gold, but they enjoy better food and accommodation than the average peasant. Ever heard of monastic beer? Yes, that's a thing, and it's as much a part of their daily life as prayer. The irony isn't lost on anyone. A vow of chastity and poverty paired with a diet that would make a modern foodie envious. Christianity's influence extends beyond the walls of the church and monastery. It shapes everything from the legal system to social norms. The concept of divine right, for example, is a handy tool for keeping the social hierarchy intact. After all, if the king rules by God's will, questioning his authority is akin to questioning divine order. It's a neat way to keep everyone in line, from the lowliest serf to the most rebellious noble. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Church's grip on medieval life isn't just benevolent guidance. It's a complex web of power and control. Heresy is a real threat, and stepping out of line can land you in hot water, literally if you're unfortunate enough to face trial by ordeal. The Church's role as moral compass is intertwined with its political influence, making it a force to be reckoned with in both spiritual and temporal affairs. As the afternoon rolls on, you might find yourself participating in a village ritual or simply observing from the sidelines. Either way, the Church's influence is inescapable. Whether it's the ringing of the church bell marking the hours or the priest's sermon echoing through the village square, religion is woven into the very fabric of your daily existence. It's a comforting constant, even if the reality is more nuanced than the legends suggest. So as you wander back to your home, the church's bell tolling in the background, you ponder the dual nature of its presence in your life. It's a source of solace and community, yet also a reminder of the limits imposed upon you. The spiritual and the social are intertwined in a dance as complex as the feudal system itself, a testament to the delicate balance that defines your medieval world. And there you have it, the church, festivals, and monastic life, each a piece of the puzzle that makes up your medieval existence. The myths and realities blend together, creating a tapestry as intricate as any woven by the village artisans. As you prepare for the evening's rest, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring in this world where the sacred and the mundane are always just a heartbeat apart. As you settle back into your humble abode, the warmth of the hearth contrasting with the chill of the encroaching night, it's time to unravel the tangled web of broader forces that shape your medieval existence. Let's dive into the murky waters of taxation, warfare, and trade. Because, let's face it, nothing says relaxing evening quite like contemplating economic burdens and armed conflict. First off, taxes. Taxes. The universal constant that seems to transcend time and space. In your medieval village, taxes aren't just a nuisance, they're a way of life. Picture this. You're already giving a chunk of your harvest to your lord, a tithe to the church, and now the crown demands its share. It's a fiscal juggling act that would make even the most seasoned accountant break into a cold sweat. The average peasant might shell out around 10% of their produce to the church, and another portion, sometimes up to 25%, to the lord. And if you're unlucky enough to be under the thumb of a particularly greedy monarch, well, let's just say your family won't be feasting on anything but thin gruel. The crown, ever in need of funds for its grandiose endeavors, imposes various taxes, from hearth taxes, a fee for every fireplace in your home, to bridge tolls and market dues. These are just the official ones. Unofficially, your lord might decide it's time for a gift to support his latest foray into court politics or to finance a local skirmish. After all, castles don't build themselves, and knights aren't exactly volunteering their swords for free. It's a world where every penny, or rather groat, counts, and the peasantry foots the bill. Now, let's turn our gaze to warfare, an ever-present spectre that looms over your pastoral life. Warfare in the medieval era is a bit like the weather, unavoidable, unpredictable, and occasionally devastating. The 100 Years' War, for example, isn't just a catchy name for a lengthy spat between England and France. It's a drawn-out conflict that stretches resources thin and pulls farmers from fields to fight battles they have little stake in. You might be conscripted to swing a sword for a lord whose face you've never seen, all in the name of some distant feudal claim. But warfare isn't just a matter of swords and sieges. It's an economic juggernaut that impacts everything from crop yields to market prices. Armies marching through your fields don't exactly ask for permission, and the aftermath often leaves a trail of destruction that takes years to recover from. We're talking about scorched earth tactics, livestock appropriated for rations, and entire villages razed in the name of victory. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of raiding parties, those charming bands of merry men who prefer taking what they need rather than asking politely. Trade, on the other hand, is the medieval lifeline that keeps villages like yours afloat. It's a complex network of routes and relationships, stretching from local markets to distant lands. Your village might be small, but it's a cog in the grand machine of medieval commerce. Local trade deals in essentials, grain, wool, timber, while international trade brings in exotic goods like spices, silks, and that elusive coffee you've yet to taste. The Silk Road, that legendary artery connecting east and west, is the medieval version of Amazon Prime, albeit with a slower delivery time and a higher risk of banditry. But here's the kicker. Trade isn't just about goods changing hands. It's a cultural exchange, a crucible where ideas, technologies, and even diseases mingle. It brings the world to your doorstep, for better or worse. While you're trading wool, you're also inadvertently trading knowledge, innovation, and, unfortunately, plagues. The Black Death of 1347-1351 doesn't just decimate populations. It rewrites the social and economic order, proving that sometimes globalization comes with a heavy price tag. So where does all this leave you, the medieval villager, caught in the crosshairs of politics and economics? It's a precarious existence, balancing the demands of lords, the whims of the church, and the uncertainties of trade and warfare. Yet, despite the challenges, there's a peculiar resilience to it all. You find ways to adapt, to endure, and to carve out a semblance of stability in a world that's anything but stable. As the evening deepens and the stars begin their dance across the night sky, you can't help but reflect on the myths and realities of your medieval life. The romantic notion of a simpler time, where life is unburdened by modern complexities, is as seductive as it is misleading. The truth is far more nuanced, a tapestry of hardship and hope, where every thread tells a story of survival and tenacity. In the end, this medieval world, with all its flaws and fascinations, is a testament to the enduring human spirit. It's a world where the mundane and the magnificent coexist, where every sunrise brings new challenges, and every sunset offers a moment of reflection. And as you drift into sleep, the distant echoes of history whisper their lessons, reminding you that while the past may be a foreign country, its stories are as familiar as they are timeless. In a world where civilizations often made their entrance with all the subtlety of a marching band, the Hittites managed to slip onto the historical stage almost like a whisper. Somewhere around 1600 BCE, they popped up in Anatolia, the region we now know as Turkey, which, back then, was more about rugged landscapes and less about seaside resorts. They weren't exactly greeted with a welcome mat, more like wary side-eyes from neighbors who assumed these newcomers were just passing through, perhaps on their way to a better gig somewhere else. But the Hittites had other plans. They set their sights on carving out a kingdom, and boy, did they succeed. The mystery of the Hittites' origins is one of those historical puzzles that keeps archaeologists and historians up at night, pondering over clay tablets and ancient scripts. We know they spoke an Indo-European language, which ties them to a linguistic family tree that includes Latin and Greek. It's like finding out your long-lost cousins are rock stars when you've been living in a small town your whole life. There's a possibility they migrated from somewhere near the Black Sea, but honestly, the details are murkier than your average conspiracy theory. What isn't murky, however, is their knack for warfare. Let's talk about chariots. When most people think of chariots, they might envision the Romans or the Egyptians, but the Hittites were early adopters of this ancient technology, turning it into a war machine that would make even a modern-day military strategist nod in approval. Picture this: a lightweight, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses, charging across the battlefield at breakneck speed. It was like the sports car of its day, only with more potential for mayhem. Hittites used these chariots not just for show, but as a decisive factor in their military campaigns, cutting through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. Now, there's a myth floating around that the Hittites were a bunch of barbaric ruffians, crashing into Anatolia with nothing more than brute force and a lack of table manners. But let's set the record straight. Sure, they knew how to throw down in battle, but they were also shrewd diplomats and administrators. They crafted treaties, some of which are the oldest known in history, showing they had a way with words as much as they did with weapons. In fact, one of their most famous treaties was with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh, a dust-up that saw both sides claiming victory, a classic case of spin-doctoring if ever there was one. And then there's Hadusa, the Hittite capital, a city that could give any modern metropolis a run for its money in terms of defensive architecture. Nestled in the mountains, it was a fortress city with walls that went on for miles. Imagine living in a place more fortified than a corporate office with a penchant for security badges. The city's ruins today still showcase the sheer scale and ambition of Hittite construction, with massive gates and temples that speak to a civilization that was anything but primitive. Economically, the Hittites weren't just about fighting and fortifying. They tapped into the rich resources of Anatolia, trading in metals like silver and copper, which were as valuable then as they are now, though probably not traded on stock exchanges. This trade network extended their influence far beyond their immediate neighbors, connecting them with other powerful entities of the time. Politically, the Hittites played a game of chess on a board that included major powers like Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. They were not mere pawns. They were kings and queens making strategic moves, forming alliances, and at times engaging in subterfuge that would make a spy thriller seem tame. Their ability to maneuver through the complex web of ancient Near Eastern politics was nothing short of impressive. Yet, for all their achievements and the might of their empire, the Hittites eventually faded into the shadows of history, their civilization collapsing around 1200 BCE during the mysterious Late Bronze Age collapse. It's a tale as old as time. Great empires rise and fall, leaving behind ruins and stories for future generations to ponder over. So, as we delve into this story of the Hittites, let's remember that they were more than just warriors with a flair for chariots and diplomacy. They were a people who managed to leave a mark on history, despite the odds and the chaotic times they lived in. Whether they were admired, feared, or misunderstood, the Hittites certainly knew how to make an entrance and an exit that history wouldn't soon forget. Speaking of making an entrance, let's shift the spotlight from the Hittites' swashbuckling adventures to their less glamorous, yet equally intriguing, day-to-day operations. Forget the image of a king with a guard complex issuing decrees from on high. The Hittites were more of a boardroom kind of monarchy, where the king didn't just rule by divine right, but rather with a council of nobles breathing down his neck. Imagine a CEO who constantly has to appease an advisory board armed with swords instead of spreadsheets. These nobles, known as the Pancus, were the real power players, holding the king accountable and ensuring he didn't go full despot on them. It was a system that might not have been democratic by modern standards, but it sure beat the absolute rule of a single tyrant with a penchant for erecting statues in his own likeness. Now, let's dive into the Hittite legal system. If you think ancient law was all about an eye for an eye, the Hittites are here to surprise you. Their legal code, which dates back to around 1650 BCE, was surprisingly progressive. Instead of the usual draconian punishments, they had a system of fines that would make a traffic cop proud. Steal a sheep, that'll cost you 12 shekels. Break someone's arm, pay up, but keep your own limbs intact. It's like they were running a medieval version of Judge Judy, focusing more on restitution than retribution. This approach not only kept the peace, but helped to maintain social order without leaving a trail of one-eyed, one-handed citizens in its wake. Speaking of social order, the Hittites had a fascinating hierarchy. At the top you had the king, who, despite his noble council, still wielded considerable power. Below him were those pesky nobles, and then came the free citizens, who had more rights than you might expect in an ancient society. Interestingly, slavery did exist, but it wasn't the brutal, dehumanizing institution seen in other ancient cultures. Slaves could own property and even by their freedom. It's almost as if Hittite society had a touch of ancient social mobility, albeit with a lot of strings attached. Family life among the Hittites. Well, it was no sitcom, but it did have its own quirks. Marriage contracts were a thing, complete with clauses that would make any modern-day lawyer nod in approval. These contracts protected assets and outlined responsibilities, ensuring that both parties knew what they were getting into. Divorce wasn't exactly encouraged, but was permissible, and usually the property was split. So, if things didn't work out, at least you wouldn't be left out in the cold with nothing but a loincloth and a sad story. Now, let's talk about women in Hittite society. Despite the patriarchal nature of the ancient world, Hittite women had more rights than you might think. They could own land, engage in business, and even hold religious office. The Hittite queen, in particular, wielded significant influence. She was not just a pretty face beside the king, but an active participant in state affairs, sometimes even leading diplomatic missions. Think of her as the ancient equivalent of a high-powered executive, only with more historical drama and fewer power suits. The nuts and bolts of Hittite administration were another area where they shone. They had an extensive network of scribes who kept meticulous records on clay tablets, ensuring that the bureaucratic machine ran smoothly. These scribes were the unsung heroes of the Hittite kingdom, managing everything from tax collection to diplomatic correspondence. It's a wonder they didn't demand hazard pay for dealing with all the red tape, or clay, as the case may be. Economically, the Hittites were quite the savvy traders. They knew how to work the system, tapping into the lucrative trade networks of the Near East. Their strategic location allowed them to act as middlemen in the trade of metals, textiles, and other valuable goods. This not only filled their coffers, but also strengthened their diplomatic ties with neighboring powers. It's a testament to their economic acumen that they managed to thrive in such a competitive landscape, balancing commerce and politics like seasoned pros. As for religion, the Hittites had a pantheon of gods that would make the Greek deities look like a modest bunch. Their religious practices were a blend of Indo-European and local Anatolian traditions, resulting in a complex tapestry of beliefs that permeated every aspect of life. Rituals were conducted with great pomp, often involving the royal family and high priests, ensuring that the gods remained appeased and the kingdom prospered. In terms of military organization, the Hittites were nothing if not pragmatic. Their army was a formidable force, well organized and disciplined. While they are best known for their chariots, they also had a robust infantry and cavalry. The king himself was often expected to lead the troops into battle, a risky endeavor that kept him both humble and in touch with the realities of warfare. This hands-on approach was yet another reason the Hittites managed to maintain their dominance for so long. So, while the Hittites might not have the same household name recognition as the Egyptians or Babylonians, they were a force to be reckoned with in their own right. Their system of governance, legal innovations, and social structures reveal a society that was far more complex and nuanced than the barbaric stereotypes often associated with them. As we continue this deep dive into their fascinating world, we'll uncover even more layers to their story, each more intriguing than the last. Stay tuned, because the Hittites have plenty more to reveal in our journey through their history. Now, let's plunge into the bustling economic heart of the Hittite Empire, where trade was more than just a way to fill the royal treasury. It was the lifeblood that kept their civilization humming. Picture the Hittites as ancient moguls, straddling the crossroads of the East and West with a savvy that would make Wall Street brokers green with envy. By strategically positioning themselves in Anatolia, they became the middlemen of their day, not unlike a Silk Road startup with a knack for supply chain management. First off, let's talk silver, the bling of the ancient world. The Hittites had access to rich silver deposits, which they mined with the tenacity of a prospector on a gold rush. This wasn't just about hoarding shiny stuff, though. Silver was the currency of international trade, the Bitcoin of its time, if you will. By controlling silver, the Hittites wielded economic power, enabling them to broker deals and sway political alliances. It's no wonder their neighbors watched them with the same suspicion you'd reserve for a poker player with one too many aces up his sleeve. And then there were textiles. Forget about polyester blends. Hittite textiles were all about luxury. They produced fine woolen products that were sought after far and wide. turning their looms into veritable cash registers. These textiles weren't just clothing. They were status symbols, draped over the shoulders of elites from Egypt to Mesopotamia. By weaving themselves into the fabric of international commerce, the Hittites ensured their influence spread as far as their threads could reach. Now, here's a twist worthy of a Game of Thrones subplot. The Hittites also dealt in diplomatic hostages. Picture this: a trade agreement sealed not just with a handshake, but with the exchange of royal family members. It was like swapping chess pieces to ensure a stalemate rather than a checkmate. This practice, while a bit medieval for modern tastes, was a shrewd move. Keeping a rival's heir within their borders was the ultimate insurance policy against betrayal, a constant reminder that any double-crossing could lead to some very awkward family reunions. But let's not forget the ace up the Hittite sleeve, iron. Now, before you go picturing them as blacksmiths hammering away relentlessly, the reality is a bit more nuanced. There's a tantalizing theory that the Hittites were the first to mass-produce iron, revolutionizing warfare and industry alike. Iron weapons were sturdier and sharper than their bronze counterparts, giving the Hittites a cutting-edge advantage on the battlefield. However, it wasn't just about making pointy things. Iron was also a valuable trade commodity. By controlling the secrets of ironworking, they held a monopoly that was as enviable as it was profitable. The Hittite economic strategy was like a masterclass in diversification. They didn't just rely on one resource or trade good, but had their fingers in multiple pies. This approach not only filled their coffers, but also provided a buffer against the economic shocks that could send less diversified kingdoms spiraling into chaos. It's a reminder that in the ancient world, as now, putting all your eggs in one basket was a recipe for disaster. Yet, despite their economic prowess, the Hittites were constantly looking over their shoulders. Their strategic location was a double-edged sword, great for trade, but also a tempting target for envious neighbors. They had to juggle diplomacy and deterrence with the skill of a circus performer spinning plates. One false move, and the whole empire could come crashing down. The Hittites walked this tightrope with remarkable finesse, but the pressure was relentless. In the grand tapestry of history, the Hittites were more than just warriors and diplomats, were economic strategists who understood the power of trade and innovation. Their ability to adapt and thrive in a competitive landscape is a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. So, while they might not have the enduring fame of some of their contemporaries, their legacy as economic pioneers is etched into the annals of history. As we continue our journey through the Hittite world, keep in mind that their story is one of constant adaptation and shrewd maneuvering. They were survivalists in a world where the stakes were as high as the mountains surrounding their capital. Stay tuned, because the next chapter of Hittite history is filled with even more intrigue and innovation, proving they were anything but a flash in the pan. Now, stepping onto the international stage, the Hittites weren't just playing checkers while everyone else played chess. They were pulling off moves that would baffle a grandmaster. Picture a world where diplomacy was as much about survival as it was about alliances, where a handshake could be as powerful as a chariot charge. The Hittites were no strangers to this game, standing toe-to-toe with the Egyptians and the Assyrians, often finding themselves in the eye of the geopolitical storm. Let's dive straight into the Treaty of Kadesh, forged in 1259 BCE. This wasn't just any treaty. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a celebrity peace accord, complete with pomp, circumstance, and a bit of self-congratulation from both parties involved. Ramses II of Egypt and Hattusili III of the Hittites put pen to clay tablet here, literally, and crafted a deal that has outlasted even the most enduring peace talks of our modern era. The treaty, often heralded as the first recorded peace treaty in history, laid out terms that were surprisingly fair, given the context. It was like watching two heavyweight boxers call it a draw after a brutal 12-round match. Both sides claimed victory, but neither was particularly keen to go for another round. The Battle of Kadesh itself, that happened a few years earlier in 1274 BCE, was less about glory and more about strategic positioning. Imagine two alpha nations trying to outmaneuver each other over a patch of land that was essentially the ancient Near East's version of prime real estate. The Hittites, led by Muwatalli II, and the Egyptians, under Ramses II, clashed with enough force to make the ground shake. but neither could claim a decisive victory. The Egyptians spun it as a win, their propaganda as over-the-top as a blockbuster movie trailer, while the Hittites quietly regrouped, satisfied they'd held their ground against one of the era's superpowers. Now, as much as militaristic might was the backbone of these interactions, it was diplomacy that truly showcased the Hittites' prowess. They were the middlemen in ancient geopolitics, and they played the role with finesse that would make a modern diplomat jealous. The Treaty of Kadesh wasn't just about ending conflict. It was about establishing a balance of power. Both the Hittites and Egyptians pledged mutual defense, essentially agreeing that if one got into a scrap, the other would step in, not out of friendship, mind you, but out of a practical desire to keep the region stable and predictable. It was a move that ensured neither side would dominate the other, a calculated gamble that paid off in years of relative peace. But what about the Assyrians? Well, the Hittites' relationship with them was less about diplomacy and more like a tense family reunion where everyone's trying not to mention the incident from last Christmas. The Assyrians were the new kids on the block, rising to power with a ruthlessness that would make a Roman emperor blush. The Hittites, savvy as ever, initially tried to contain the Assyrian threat through alliances and strategic marriages. But when push came to shove, it was clear that the Assyrians weren't interested in playing nice. The conflicts with Assyria were about survival, plain and simple. The Assyrians were expanding aggressively, and the Hittites found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, with the Assyrian war machine bearing down on them. They had to pick their battles carefully, often opting for strategic retreats and negotiations rather than full frontal assaults. It was a pragmatic approach, driven by the understanding that sometimes living to fight another day is the best strategy of all. In the grand scheme of things, the Hittites were masters of playing the long game. They understood that in the brutal world of ancient geopolitics, alliances could be as fleeting as a spring breeze, and enemies today might be allies tomorrow. Their ability to navigate these treacherous waters with a combination of diplomacy, military strategy, and economic savvy is a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. They were the embodiment of adaptability, constantly shifting their tactics to stay one step ahead of their rivals. As we delve further into the Hittites' storied history, it's clear that their legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. They were warriors and diplomats, conquerors and negotiators. Their story is a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is often more fascinating than the myths. So, as we continue this journey through the past, let's keep in mind that the Hittites were not just players on the stage of history. They were the directors, choreographing a dance of power, survival, and intrigue that still captivates us today. Stay tuned for more, because the Hittites' tale is far from over. As the curtain rises on the final chapter of the Hittite saga, we find ourselves facing a story that's all too familiar, one where the mightiest fall prey to forces beyond their control. It wasn't just the Assyrians breathing down their necks, or the Egyptians eyeing their territory like it was prime beachfront property. No, the Hittites were up against an enemy that even their chariots and treaties couldn't fend off: climate change. And no, this isn't the latest plot twist from a dystopian novel. We're talking about the late Bronze Age collapse, a perfect storm of environmental upheaval and societal strain that sent the Hittite Empire spiraling into oblivion around 1200 BCE. Let's set the scene. The Hittites, once the rock stars of Anatolia, found themselves in a climate quagmire that would make any modern-day meteorologist shudder. Droughts ravaged the land, turning fertile fields into dust bowls and sending agricultural yields plummeting faster than a lead balloon. Famine became the unwelcome guest at everyone's table, and you can bet that didn't do wonders for the economy. It's hard to trade textiles and silver when your people are more interested in finding their next meal than their next profit margin. Economically speaking, the Hittites took a hit that would make the stock market crashes look like minor blips. Their once thriving trade networks began to unravel as neighboring regions faced their own crises. The domino effect was in full swing. With resources dwindling, the Hittites' ability to maintain their military and administrative structures crumbled. It's akin to trying to run a modern empire on a shoestring budget while juggling flaming swords. Spoiler, it doesn't end well. But let's not lay all the blame at Mother Nature's feet. Internal strife played its part in this historical drama. Power struggles erupted within the royal family, turning the Hittite court into a reality show waiting to happen. Kings were deposed, assassinated, or otherwise shuffled off the mortal coil in a series of coups that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The Pancas, that council of nobles who once kept the king in check, found themselves embroiled in the chaos, their influence waning like a candle in the wind. Externally, the Hittites faced pressures that would test even the most stalwart of empires. The so-called Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation that swept through the eastern Mediterranean like a band of marauding rock stars, added to the turmoil. These enigmatic invaders disrupted trade routes, pillaged cities, and generally made a nuisance of themselves. While the Hittites were adept at handling threats from land, this maritime menace was a different beast altogether. So, what does this all mean for the Hittite legacy? Well, as it turns out, their fall wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of their enduring influence. Despite the collapse of their political structure, the cultural and technological innovations of the Hittites left an indelible mark on future civilizations. Their legal codes and diplomatic practices, which were ahead of their time, influenced the governing systems of subsequent empires. The Treaty of Kadesh, for instance, set a precedent for international diplomacy that echoes through the ages. Their mastery of ironworking, although eventually adopted and surpassed by others, laid the groundwork for the Iron Age, transforming warfare and industry in ways that would shape the ancient world. And let's not forget their impact on language. Hittite cuneiform, a writing system that recorded everything from trade transactions to royal decrees, offers modern scholars invaluable insights into the socio-political dynamics of the era, proving that the pen, or stylus, really is mightier than the sword. In the end, the Hittites teach us that history's quiet achievers often leave the loudest legacies. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and influence despite overwhelming odds is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. While their empire may have crumbled, the echoes of their achievements continue to resonate, a reminder that sometimes the stories that seem lost to time are the ones that shape the future. So, as we close the book on the Hittites, let's raise a metaphorical glass to these ancient pioneers, who, despite their fall, continue to inspire and enlighten us today. When you're thinking about building walls, the Great Wall of China is pretty much the first one that comes to mind, right? It's like the rock star of ancient construction projects. But let's rewind to where this epic tale of persistence and paranoia starts, way back in the 7th century BC. This is where the seeds of the Great Wall were planted, in a time when China wasn't really China yet. It was more like a bunch of squabbling siblings, all trying to grab the last slice of the territorial pie. Back then, the region was a patchwork quilt of small states, each with grand ambitions and a penchant for warfare. They were part of what historians cheekily call the Warring States period, which is a nice way of saying everyone was having a go at everyone else. It was like a real-life game of Risk, but with actual lives on the line. And in this chaotic landscape, leaders were trying to figure out how to keep their own necks and their lands safe from the neighbors. Enter the early wall builders. These guys were the original visionaries who thought, hey, maybe a big wall will keep those pesky invaders out. So, they started constructing walls around their territories. Now, don't get too excited thinking these were anything like the grand stone and brick edifices we know today. These early walls were made of rammed earth, which is a fancy way of saying packed dirt. Not exactly impervious, but better than nothing when your state is on the line. Fast forward to the 3rd century BC and meet the man who decided to up the ante, Qin Shi Huang. This guy wasn't messing around. He was the first emperor to unite China into a single empire, and he had some serious plans. Qin Shi Huang had a vision, and it involved making sure his newly minted empire stayed in one piece. What was his brilliant solution? You guessed it, a massive wall that would make those earlier mud piles look like sandcastles. Now, Qin Shi Huang was the kind of leader who didn't just think big, he thought massive. We're talking about a guy who wanted to live forever, which is why he was downing mercury pills like they were candy. A plot twist that didn't end well, as you might imagine. But while he was busy chasing immortality, he was also orchestrating one of the most ambitious construction projects the world had ever seen. This wasn't just a wall. It was the wall destined to stretch over 13,000 miles. That's like going from New York to Los Angeles 5 times. But here's where reality hits like a ton of bricks, or in this case, a ton of rammed earth. Imagine trying to build such a colossal structure in an era before modern machinery. There were no bulldozers, no cranes, not even a hint of dynamite to blast through the tough terrain. Instead, they had manpower, lots of it. And by manpower, I mean hundreds of thousands of laborers, many of whom were conscripted peasants, soldiers, and even convicts. Not exactly a dream job, considering the conditions were brutal, to say the least. Working on the wall was grueling. Workers toiled away in harsh climates, from scorching deserts to freezing mountains. They lugged heavy materials over unforgiving landscapes, driven by the emperor's orders. And let's not sugarcoat it, many of them never made it back home. The wall was as much a monument to human perseverance as it was to human suffering. It's said that the bodies of those who died during construction were buried within the wall, earning it the grim nickname, the longest cemetery on earth. But why, you might ask, was Qin Shi Huang so obsessed with this wall? Well, aside from keeping out those pesky northern invaders like the Xiongnu, the wall served as a powerful symbol of his might and ambition. It was a statement, one that said, "This is my empire, and I'm going to keep it safe, no matter the cost." And indeed, the cost was staggering, not just in terms of human lives, but also in resources. Building this megastructure was an economic nightmare, draining the empire's coffers and straining its logistics to the breaking point. Despite the hardships, Qin Shi Huang's wall laid the foundation for what would become the Great Wall of China. Future dynasties would add to it, modify it, and fortify it, turning it into the formidable structure we recognize today. But it all started with this emperor's audacious dream, a dream that, for better or worse, has stood the test of time. So next time you admire the Great Wall, remember it's not just a testament to architectural genius, but also a witness to the sweat, tears, and lives of countless individuals who built it one brick at a time. And maybe, just maybe, spare a thought for Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who dared to think big in a world that was still working out what big really meant. The Great Wall of China stands as an epic testament to human ambition and a monument to imperial hubris. But let's not get ahead of ourselves with poetic musings just yet. As we wade into the economic and social quagmire that was the construction phase, it's important to remember that this wasn't a feel-good community project. It was more like a state-mandated nightmare for those unlucky enough to be conscripted. Imagine, if you will, the logistics. A workforce that resembled a motley crew more than a cohesive team. The laborers were a colorful assortment, if you consider shades of desperation colorful. Soldiers, peasants, and prisoners made up the bulk. It's as if the Qin dynasty decided that if you were breathing, you were building. This was less about civic duty and more about brute survival, with promises of meager rations and the ever-looming threat of death driving the point home. Let's talk numbers, shall we? Some estimates suggest that upwards of 300,000 people were involved in various stages of construction. And while it might sound like a grand employment scheme, think more along the lines of a death sentence. The mortality rate was staggering. Some sources claim that for every mile of wall, over 1,000 lives were lost. The laborers weren't just building a wall, they were becoming it, literally. The bodies of the deceased were often buried within the structure itself, which might explain why it's sometimes called the longest cemetery on Earth. It's a grim reminder that the Great Wall's grandeur is built on a foundation of bones. Financially, the empire was bleeding. Constructing such an enormous barrier wasn't just about stacking bricks and ramming earth. It was a colossal drain on resources. The Qin treasury wasn't exactly overflowing with gold, and funneling funds into the wall meant cutting corners elsewhere. Or rather, cutting the empire's economic throat. Taxes were hiked to astronomical levels to fund the wall, and this didn't sit well with the populace. You can imagine the conversations in peasant households, likely involving choice words for their distant emperor. "Hey, honey, guess what? We'll be eating dirt for the rest of the year to pay for that giant wall we'll never see." And what about the strategic effectiveness of this massive undertaking? Did it actually keep the Mongol invaders at bay? Here's where reality pulls a fast one on legend. Despite its imposing presence, the wall was far from an impenetrable barrier. The Mongols, being the shrewd strategists they were, often found ways around or over it. The wall was more of a psychological deterrent, a statement of imperial resolve, than a foolproof defense strategy. It was like putting a giant "Do Not Disturb" sign on your door and hoping for the best. The real kicker, the wall with all its might, didn't even cover the entirety of the northern border. Parts of the frontier were left wide open, as if daring invaders to waltz in. It's like building a fence around half your yard and hoping the neighbors' dogs don't figure out they can just walk around it. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Great Wall isn't the wall itself, but the mythology that grew around it. The Qin dynasty, followed by others, spun tales of invincibility and unity, transforming a pragmatic military barrier into a symbol of national strength. The wall became a canvas for propaganda, a convenient tool for emperors to bolster their image. "Look upon this wall, ye mighty, and despair," they seemed to say, conveniently glossing over the blood, sweat, and tears that cemented its stones. In reality, the wall was as much about keeping people in as it was keeping invaders out. It was a tool for controlling the populace, a way to draw a line between the civilized world and the barbarian chaos beyond. The romantic notion of the wall as a glorious defense against marauding hordes is tantalizing, but it's a narrative as constructed as the wall itself. So, as we marvel at this ancient wonder, let's not forget the human cost and the imperial overreach that brought it to life. The Great Wall of China is a story of monumental ambition, strategic missteps, and the eternal quest for security in an insecure world. It's a testament to the lengths humans will go to protect what they have, even if it means sacrificing what they are. And as we continue to unravel its complex narrative, remember, every stone and every legend has its price. Speaking of legends, let's fast forward to the Ming Dynasty, the era that truly put the great in the Great Wall. We're talking about the 14th to the 17th century here, a time when the wall received its most iconic makeover. The Ming folks weren't content with a patchwork assembly of mud mounds and rammed earth. No, they wanted a masterpiece, something that screamed architectural prowess and imperial confidence. You know, the way a modern-day influencer might demand the perfect selfie background. This was the dynasty that saw the wall transformed from a rough and ready defense line into the formidable stone and brick barrier we recognize today. And let's be clear, this wasn't a quick weekend DIY project. This was a massive undertaking, stretching over 2 centuries and involving millions of laborers. We're talking about 500 miles of reinforced splendor, complete with watchtowers, fortresses, and beacon towers. It was like turning a picket fence into the Hoover Dam. The Ming Dynasty was not messing around with their architectural ambitions. They utilized bricks and stone, materials not only more durable than the previous rammed earth, but also more aesthetically pleasing. Because if you're going to build a colossal wall, why not make it a looker? The bricks were meticulously laid, creating a surface so smooth and regular that you might think it was made with the precision of a Swiss watch. The wall even boasted battlements and crenellations, those notched tops you see in medieval castles, offering soldiers protection and a place to duck down while being shot at. Technological advancements were the name of the game during this period. The Ming engineers were like the Silicon Valley whiz kids of their day, coming up with innovations that would have made their ancestors weep with envy. They utilized wheelbarrows, pulleys, and even early forms of cement made from lime and rice paste. Yes, you heard that right, rice paste. Who knew your favorite stir-fry staple could double as a building material? This was ancient efficiency at its finest. But let's not get too swept away by the grandiosity of Ming construction without acknowledging the gritty reality for those who lived and worked along the wall. The Ming Dynasty may have perfected the art of wall building, but life on the wall was anything but perfect. Stationed at this colossal structure were soldiers tasked with defending the empire from marauding invaders, as well as ensuring that no one slipped through undetected. Imagine spending your days and nights on this remote, windswept expanse. Romantic, right? Well, not exactly. The soldiers faced freezing winters and scorching summers, tucked away in their watchtowers with nothing but the howling wind and the occasional scuffle with bandits to keep them company. Supplies were scarce, morale was low, and the only thing more common than an invasion was an outbreak of boredom. It wasn't exactly the cushy government job you might hope for. And then there were the ghost stories. Because no ancient monument is complete without a few spooky tales, right? The Great Wall has its share of spectral legends, spun from the threads of history and imagination. One of the most famous is that of Lady Meng Jiang, whose story is a heartbreaker worthy of a Hollywood adaptation. As the tale goes, her husband was conscripted to work on the wall and never returned. Overcome with grief, she journeyed to the wall, only to find that he had died and been buried within its stones. Her cries were so mournful that parts of the wall collapsed, revealing his bones. It's a ghost story with a decidedly human twist, a reminder that the wall is not just a stone structure, but a monument to the lives it consumed. Despite these harsh realities, the wall has endured as a symbol of Chinese strength and perseverance. It's the ultimate paradox, a structure that was meant to keep people out, yet today draws millions in. Tourists flock to its battlements, eager to walk in the footsteps of ancient soldiers and snap selfies with a piece of history. The Great Wall has become a romantic icon, a testament to human ambition and the tenacity of those who built and defended it. But let's not forget the economic toll the wall took on the Ming dynasty. Reinforcing and expanding the wall was a costly endeavor, one that drained the imperial coffers and strained resources. The Ming government had to levy heavy taxes to keep the project going, which, unsurprisingly, didn't win them any popularity contests. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially when that lunch is a 500-mile wall. In the end, the Great Wall of China is a story of contrasts, a symbol of unity and division, ambition and sacrifice, myth and reality. It stands as a testament to the lengths humans will go to protect what they hold dear, even if it means creating a barrier that spans centuries. The wall has witnessed empires rise and fall, seen countless lives pass through its gates, and borne silent witness to the dreams and desperations of those who built it. As we continue to unravel the story of the Great Wall, let's keep in mind that each stone and story is part of a larger tapestry, one that tells us as much about the people who built it as it does about those who remember it. The wall is more than just a relic of the past. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of human experiences, woven together in the fabric of time. And as we journey deeper into its history, we'll discover that the wall still has many tales to tell. And as we journey deeper into the story of the Great Wall, let's tackle some of the most enduring myths that have clung to it like moss on a stone. Let's start with the big one, the tale that the Great Wall is the only man-made object visible from space. Spoiler alert, it's not. Astronauts have confirmed that while the wall is long enough to be seen with the naked eye from a low Earth orbit, it's not the grand, glowing line that myth would have us believe. In fact, it's about as visible as a single hair on a giant's head. So, next time someone waxes poetic about its celestial visibility, you can smile knowingly and drop that truth bomb. Now, onto another whopper. The idea that the Great Wall is a single, unbroken barrier snaking serenely across the landscape like a disciplined dragon. The reality is more like a patchwork quilt thrown together by a committee with an ad hoc building plan. The wall isn't one continuous line, but a series of walls built at different times by different dynasties, each with its own agenda. Some parts are well preserved, others are crumbling messes, and some sections have disappeared entirely, swallowed by the sands of time or repurposed by enterprising locals needing building materials. It's like expecting a seamless symphony and getting a mixtape instead. These misconceptions aren't just harmless tales, they're woven into the fabric of national pride and tourism. The Great Wall, with its myths, serves as a symbol of China's historical might and resilience. It's a bit like your favorite tall tale. It's got a kernel of truth, but it's been polished to a high shine, adding a dash of mystique and allure that draws you in. But why let facts get in the way of a good story, right? Because understanding the truth can be just as compelling, especially when you dig into the historical records and primary sources. The earliest accounts of the wall come from scholars like Sima Qian, the grand historian of the Han dynasty, who chronicled its construction and the sheer audacity of the endeavor. His records, while invaluable, were often colored by the political and social biases of the time. Fast forward to more recent historians, and you'll find a mix of awe and skepticism as they piece together the real story from the ruins and remnants. What's fascinating is how the narrative of the Great Wall has been shaped and reshaped over centuries, much like the wall itself. Emperors used it as a manifestation of their power, a tangible line in the sand, or stone, if you will, that declared, "This far and no further." It was as much about projecting strength as it was about actual defense. And let's not forget the wall's role in the tourism industry. Modern China has capitalized on the wall's legendary status, marketing it as a must-see wonder of the world, myths and all. Who doesn't want to snap a selfie on a structure that supposedly touches the heavens? Here's another fun fact. The wall's utility went beyond military defense. It functioned as a kind of ancient customs office, regulating trade and the movement of people. It was a place where tariffs could be levied, and where the government could keep an eye on who was coming and going. The Great Wall was less about keeping people out and more about controlling the flow within. It's like the historical equivalent of a bouncer at a club, deciding who gets in and who gets turned away. As we peel back the layers of myth and reality, it becomes clear that the Great Wall is a tapestry of human endeavor, ambition and folly. Each brick and battlement tells a story of empire and individual, of dreams and despair. And while the myths serve to elevate its status, the truths make it all the more human and relatable. After all, aren't we all just a little bit drawn to the grand, the impossible, and the slightly unbelievable? So, as we leave the myths behind and delve deeper into the wall's story, let's keep our eyes peeled for the nuances and complexities that make history so darn interesting. Because in the end, the Great Wall isn't just a line on a map or a backdrop for tourist photos. It's a living testament to the human condition, with all its triumphs and tribulations, myths and realities. And there's still so much more to uncover as we continue this epic journey across time and space. Stay tuned, because this ancient marvel has plenty more secrets to reveal. And as we journey deeper into the story of the Great Wall, let's talk about where this ancient marvel stands today, figuratively and literally. Now, while you might think a structure that's been around since before the Common Era would be resting comfortably on its laurels, the Great Wall's story is far from over. In 1987, it earned its spot on the UNESCO World Heritage List. This isn't just a fancy plaque and a pat on the back for historical significance. It's an acknowledgement of the wall's colossal impact on both the landscape and the human imagination. You see, the Great Wall is much more than an ancient stone structure snaking across China's rugged terrain. It's a symbol of national identity, a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that's weathered countless storms. But let's be real for a second. Maintaining a 13,000-mile-long monument isn't exactly a walk in the park. It's more like trying to keep an old car running on a road trip across the country without a mechanic in sight. Preservation efforts for this behemoth are a monumental challenge, involving a mix of archaeology, engineering, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. The Chinese government, alongside international organizations, has been working tirelessly to keep the wall standing. But nature has a way of reclaiming its own, and the forces of erosion are relentless. Over a third of the wall has already crumbled away, thanks to natural wear and tear, and in some parts it's been reduced to little more than a memory. Then there's the human factor. Tourists, bless their curious hearts, have a knack for unintentionally causing damage. Millions flock to the wall each year, eager to leave their mark, or at least their initials, on this piece of history. It's like a giant, irresistible canvas for amateur graffiti artists. And while selfies are great for Instagram, they're not so great for the ancient stones that bear the brunt of the selfie stick brigade. But the real kicker, the wall's not just battling nature and tourists, it's fighting against modern development. In some areas, rapid urban expansion has led to sections of the wall being destroyed or damaged. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? A structure built to protect against the outside world now finds itself under siege from within. Despite these challenges, there's a silver lining. The Great Wall's legacy continues to inspire awe and respect. It's a powerful reminder of what humans can achieve when they set their minds to it, even if the reasons behind it were as much about fear as they were about unity. The Wall's story is one of ambition and resilience, a narrative that resonates with the modern world in surprising ways. And let's not forget the stories we tell about the Wall. In the age of information, where myths can be debunked with a quick Google search, the Great Wall still holds its mystique. It's a testament to our love of grand narratives and the romance of history. We're drawn to its myths, like the idea that it's visible from space, because they're captivating, even if they're not entirely true. These stories give the Wall an aura that facts alone can't match, adding layers to its already rich tapestry. But perhaps the most valuable lesson from the Great Wall is one of human nature itself. It's a mirror reflecting our eternal quest for security, the lengths we'll go to protect what we hold dear, and the ways we construct our own realities. The wall stands as a reminder that while we can build barriers, real and metaphorical, they're only as strong as the resolve behind them. In the end, the Great Wall of China is more than just stones and stories. It's a living entity, evolving with the times, adapting to the challenges thrown its way. It's a symbol of endurance, not because it's unchanging, but precisely because it has changed, and continues to change, alongside us. As we look to the future, the wall's legacy will undoubtedly continue to shape our understanding of history, identity, and the stories we choose to tell. The Great Wall has witnessed empires rise and fall, seen countless lives pass through its gates, and borne silent witness to the dreams and desperations of those who built it. As we close this chapter of its history, let's not just admire it from afar. Let's engage with it, question it, and learn from it. Because in the end, the wall is a testament to the human spirit, its ambitions, its follies, and its unyielding resilience. And really, what better legacy could there be? Marcus Aurelius was born into a world that would have been the perfect setting for a reality TV show, the decadent Roman Empire. Think Keeping Up with the Aurelians, if you will. Marcus, born in 121 AD, was the golden boy of the Antonine dynasty, destined for greatness not just by blood, but by brains and brawn too. Before he was the bearded philosopher king we all think we know, he was just a kid with a fancy toga and a lot of potential. Raised in the bustling chaos of Rome, young Marcus was more than just a future emperor. He was a sponge for knowledge. His tutors didn't include your run-of-the-mill math or history teachers. Oh no, Marcus was schooled by some of the most prominent intellectual heavyweights of his time. We're talking big names like Herodes Atticus, the Greek orator, and Marcus Cornelius Fronto, a rhetorician so sharp he could fillet a verbal argument with a single sentence. These guys weren't just teaching him how to read and write. They were molding a future ruler who could think on his feet and deliver lines with the precision of a gladiator's thrust. But don't let the image of Marcus as a bookish nerd fool you. His education wasn't just about crafting essays and reciting Homer. It was about understanding power, strategy, and the art of not getting stabbed in the back by your political rivals, a very Roman concern. Let's be honest. Was trained in philosophy, notably Stoicism, which basically taught him how to keep a stiff upper lip while the empire around him was a hot mess. Now, the narrative of Marcus as a philosopher king is seductive, isn't it? The idea of a ruler who spends his afternoons debating ethics and pondering the meaning of life makes for a great bedtime story. But let's strip away the romanticism for a moment. The reality was a bit more Game of Thrones than Dead Poets Society. Marcus's early rise to power was a strategic chess game, and he was no pawn. Sure, he was a philosopher, but he was also a politician, and those two roles don't always mesh as nicely as one might hope. In 138 AD, when he was just 17, Marcus got a serious career boost. Emperor Hadrian, the guy who famously built a wall across Britain to keep out the Scots, because why not, adopted Antoninus Pius as his successor. Antoninus, in turn, adopted Marcus, setting the young philosopher on a fast track to the imperial throne. It wasn't exactly the kind of adoption story that tugs at the heartstrings, but hey, it got the job done. But why Marcus? Good question. The official narrative paints him as the natural choice due to his virtues and intellect. However, the reality likely involved a hefty dose of political maneuvering, family ties, and a sprinkle of luck. It was less about destiny, and more about being in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the right nursery with the right pedigree. As he ascended through the imperial ranks, Marcus's Stoic education became both a blessing and a burden. The Stoics preached the value of reason and virtue, which sounds fantastic until you're faced with the gritty realities of Roman politics. Imagine trying to apply philosophical principles like acceptance of fate and indifference to material wealth in a world where betrayal and opulence were as common as public baths. Not exactly an easy fit. Marcus's early political maneuvers reveal a man who understood the delicate balance of power. He wasn't just sitting around writing meditations. He was actively engaging in the cutthroat world of Roman politics. He worked closely with Antoninus Pius, learning the ropes and no doubt taking mental notes on how to keep the empire running smoothly without getting bogged down by scandal or rebellion. It was all about maintaining stability, a task akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Even as a young man, Marcus was savvy enough to recognize the importance of image. He played up his philosophical leanings as part of his public persona, a move that endeared him to both the Roman Senate and the people. But let's not kid ourselves. Behind the serene facade was a man who knew how to wield power with precision. He understood that being seen as a philosopher king was as much about politics as it was about personal belief. So, while we can admire Marcus for his intellectual pursuits and Stoic wisdom, it's crucial to remember that he was also a product of his time. His rise to power wasn't just a philosophical journey. It was a calculated ascent through the ranks of a complex and often ruthless political system. As we delve deeper into his reign, we'll see that the line between philosopher and politician was not as clear-cut as history might lead us to believe. And that's what makes Marcus Aurelius such a fascinating figure. He was juggling more than just his philosophical texts. He was juggling an entire empire. As Marcus Aurelius stepped into the role of co-emperor alongside Lucius Verus, it was clear that the duo had a Herculean task ahead of them. Imagine two captains trying to navigate a colossal ship through an ocean filled with fiscal storms and military whirlpools. The Roman Empire was the Titanic of its time, not in the sense of a tragic ending, not yet anyway, but in sheer size and complexity. It was a beast of an empire, sprawling across 3 continents and requiring a budget that would make a modern CEO break into a cold sweat. Marcus and Lucius were a bit of an odd couple, like a classical era buddy cop movie where one is the Stoic philosopher and the other, well, let's just say, had a penchant for living life on the wilder side. While Marcus was busy pondering the nature of existence, Lucius was off on campaigns enjoying the finer things in life, like lavish parties and gladiatorial games. But don't be fooled into thinking their partnership was all fun and games. They had serious work to do. One of their biggest tasks was the management of the empire's finances. Running the Roman Empire was no cheap affair. Picture this, maintaining a standing army of 500,000 soldiers, which today would be like trying to keep a fleet of Ferraris running on a bicycle budget. The Roman legions were not just symbols of power. They were the glue holding the empire together. And glue, as anyone who's tried a DIY project knows, can be surprisingly expensive. The financial burden was staggering. By the time Marcus and Lucius took the helm around 161 AD, the Roman treasury was dealing with a serious case of chronic emptiness. The empire's economic woes were exacerbated by the Antonine Plague, which swept through the empire like a bad review on Yelp. This pandemic, thought to be either smallpox or measles, caused widespread devastation, wiping out up to 1/3 of the population in some areas. The economic implications were severe: fewer taxpayers, fewer soldiers, and an overall decline in productivity. It's hard to collect taxes when your citizens are, quite literally, dropping like flies. Marcus, being the practical philosopher that he was, didn't just sit around waiting for things to improve. He implemented a series of fiscal reforms to stabilize the economy. These included cutting unnecessary expenditures and increasing taxes, because nothing says "I care" like reaching deeper into your citizens' pockets. But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Marcus even resorted to auctioning off imperial treasures, a sort of ancient garage sale, to raise funds for the military campaigns and public works. Imagine bidding on a philosopher king's personal collection of statues and art pieces. Talk about a conversation starter. Meanwhile, Lucius was sent off to the eastern provinces to deal with the Parthian War, a belligerent neighbor who clearly didn't get the memo about peace and love. This campaign was a significant economic drain, with the Parthians proving to be as stubborn as a mule on a mission. Maintaining the Roman legions on the eastern front required substantial resources, and the costs were astronomical. The war effort drained the treasury faster than a toga party drains a wine amphora. Marcus, though more of a thinker than a fighter, understood that keeping the empire intact required more than just philosophical musings. He took an active role in addressing military challenges, recognizing that a strong defense was crucial to the empire's survival. The Roman legions were the backbone of the empire, and Marcus knew that if they weren't properly funded and maintained, the whole structure could come crashing down like a poorly built aqueduct. But military campaigns and fiscal strategies weren't the only items on Marcus's agenda. He was acutely aware of the growing discontent among the populace. The people of Rome weren't exactly thrilled about the increased taxes and the constant threats of invasion. Public unrest was as perennial as the Roman calendar, and Marcus had to navigate these turbulent waters with the skill of a seasoned sailor. He employed a mix of public appeasement and pragmatic governance to keep the masses from revolting. Marcus was savvy enough to know that bread and circuses, Rome's version of public relations, could only go so far. He focused on improving public infrastructure and social welfare, investing in roads, aqueducts, and public baths. These projects not only provided jobs, but also improved the quality of life in the empire, a move that was as much about practicality as it was about placating public anger. Marcus's reign, in many ways, was a balancing act between maintaining the status quo and ushering in necessary reforms. He was a ruler who had to contend with the harsh realities of an empire in decline, yet he managed to keep things relatively stable during his tenure. His strategies were not always popular, but then again, neither are broccoli or taxes. But just like those green veggies, his decisions, though tough to swallow, were often for the greater good. As we continue to explore the reign of Marcus Aurelius, it's essential to remember that his legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. He was the philosopher king who had to put down the scroll and pick up the sword. His leadership was marked by both wisdom and pragmatism, a duality that makes him as intriguing today as he was nearly 2 millennia ago. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to be a fly on the wall during one of those imperial budget meetings? I mean, should we cut expenses on gladiator games or the military? Decisions. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor who might have preferred a quiet day with his scrolls, found himself neck-deep in one of the most convoluted military messes of his reign, the Marcomannic Wars. Picture this: barbarian tribes at your northern borders, not quite sending RSVP cards, but certainly showing up uninvited to the empire's doorstep. This was the reality Marcus faced as he donned his armor and prepared for a battle that would make any philosopher reconsider their life choices. Now, the Marcomannic Wars, kicking off around 166 AD, were less like a single epic clash and more like a really long, messy series of skirmishes. Think of it as the Fast and Furious franchise of ancient warfare. Just when you thought it was over, another sequel dropped. The Roman Empire, already stretched thin by previous conflicts, and the Antonine Plague had to muster all its resources to fend off the Germanic tribes and their allies, who were becoming as persistent as spam emails. These were not your run-of-the-mill border skirmishes. The Marcomanni, along with the Quadi, Sarmatians, and other tribes, were pushing south with the tenacity of a toddler after a sugar high. They breached the Danube frontier, and at one point they even reached as far as Aquileia, a mere hop, skip, and a gladiator's leap from Italy proper. For Marcus, this wasn't just a game of military chess. It was a logistical nightmare of epic proportions, complete with supply chain headaches that would make a modern logistics manager weep. Marcus's approach to warfare was as unconventional as a toga at a punk rock concert. He understood that brute force wasn't enough. You needed brains and a touch of diplomacy. One of his standout moves was the use of auxiliary troops, recruiting soldiers from the very tribes they were fighting. Imagine signing up your arch-nemesis to play on your soccer team. It was a calculated risk, but it paid off, adding diversity to Roman forces and providing valuable intel about enemy tactics. But let's not sugarcoat it. The fighting was brutal. Marcus wasn't just reading Plato by the campfire. He was making tough calls that would chill even the most hardened warriors. He ordered mass deportations and resettlements of conquered peoples, move that was less about benevolence and more about keeping potential troublemakers under Roman watch. These were not decisions of a man solely in pursuit of philosophical ideals. They were the gritty choices of a leader trying to maintain control over an empire that felt like it was held together by duct tape and hope. Financially, the wars were a black hole, sucking in resources at an alarming rate. Marcus had to dip into the emergency funds, yet again, raising taxes and, in a move that would put any garage sale to shame, selling off imperial treasures to fund the war effort. The empire's coffers were as empty as a philosopher's wine glass at a symposium. and Marcus had to be both frugal and strategic to keep the military machine running. Throughout all this, Marcus's long-term vision was clear. He was playing the long game, aiming for a stable and secure empire that could withstand future threats. He wasn't just a warrior philosopher, he was a statesman with a vision. His military strategies included fortifying the Danube line and establishing new provinces, part of a broader plan to buffer the empire against future invasions. It was a bit like adding extra locks to your front door after a break-in, a necessary step to ensure peace of mind. However, the romantic image of Marcus as the peaceful philosopher king takes quite a bruising when you consider these harsh realities. Yes, he penned his famous meditations during these campaigns, but let's not forget the blood, sweat, and sheer grit that went into maintaining imperial stability. His writings, full of Stoic wisdom, might suggest a man at peace with himself, but his actions reveal the tension of a ruler burdened by the weight of an empire. Marcus had to be both the sage and the soldier, a duality that few could balance, but one he managed with remarkable dexterity. So, while the tales of Marcus's philosophical leanings continue to captivate, it's crucial to acknowledge the complexity of his reign. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a doer, a leader who had to make the hard decisions to keep the empire intact. The Marcomannic Wars may not have the romantic allure of other Roman conquests, but they highlight a key aspect of Marcus's legacy: his ability to adapt, improvise, and maintain a semblance of order in a world teetering on chaos. As we leave Marcus amid the ruins of battlefields and the echoes of his meditative thoughts, we see a ruler who faced the harsh realities of power with both philosophical insight and pragmatic courage. His reign was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where ideals and realities often clashed like gladiators in the arena. And as we prepare to delve deeper into his story, remember that Marcus Aurelius was not just a man of thought, but a man of action, navigating the stormy seas of empire with a steady hand and an unyielding resolve. As Marcus Aurelius trudged through the muck of empire management, he quickly realized that the battlefield wasn't the only place where chaos reigned. Back home, the Roman Empire was a circus of its own, complete with political jugglers, senatorial clowns, and the occasional high-wire act of legal reform. If you thought handling barbarian invasions was tough, try managing the Roman Senate, a group as unpredictable as a pack of alley cats. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Marcus's domestic policies, starting with his attempts to reform the Roman legal system. Now, the Roman legal code was a bit like an ancient IKEA manual, confusing, overly complicated, and prone to causing headaches. Marcus, ever the philosopher, sought to simplify and humanize the law, adding a touch of Stoic reason to the mix. He was like the Marie Kondo of Roman bureaucracy, attempting to declutter and find joy in a system that was as joyful as a tax audit. One of his notable reforms was the introduction of the concept of equitas, or equity, which aimed to ensure that the spirit of the law matched its letter. This was revolutionary stuff, like suggesting that perhaps we shouldn't throw people to the lions for minor offenses. Marcus wanted the law to be not just a tool of the elite, but a shield for the common people. Unfortunately, shifting a legal system so entrenched in tradition was akin to turning a Roman galley around on a dime, slow and fraught with resistance. And Marcus wasn't just a legal eagle, he was also a welfare reformer. The grain dole, Rome's ancient equivalent of a social security program, was a critical aspect of his domestic policy. Picture this: a city of over 1 million people who expected their daily bread, literally. Marcus had to ensure the grain kept flowing, despite the fact that the empire's coffers were emptier than a philosopher's calendar on a Friday night. He improved the grain distribution system, trying to make it fairer and more efficient, which was about as easy as herding cats. But let's not get too misty-eyed. This benevolence wasn't entirely altruistic. Keeping the urban masses fed was also a way to keep them from rioting. Marcus understood that a hungry populace was as dangerous as an angry barbarian horde, and bread, and the occasional circus, was a cheaper fix than a full-scale revolt. It was a pragmatic move, blending philanthropy with a hefty dose of realpolitik. Now, Marcus's reign wasn't without its share of bureaucratic blunders. The Roman administration was a labyrinth of red tape, staffed by officials who often had more in common with a herd of bumbling sheep than with competent civil servants. Picture a system where filing a simple tax form could take longer than an Antonine feast, and you'll start to get the idea. Marcus had to wade through this quagmire, trying to instill efficiency where there was none. One classic example of bureaucratic hilarity involved the Roman postal system, or cursus publicus. Imagine trying to send a letter across an empire that stretched from Britannia to Egypt, relying on a network of messengers who operated at the speed of a well-fed tortoise. Marcus attempted to streamline this mess, but in a world without email, progress was slow and often comically inefficient. If you think waiting for a package today is frustrating, spare a thought for the Romans who could wait months for news to travel across the empire. But amidst this chaos, one of the greatest challenges Marcus faced was the Antonine Plague, which swept through the empire like a particularly aggressive game of tag. This was no ordinary cold. We're talking about a pandemic that killed an estimated 5 million people, a staggering number for the time. Marcus's response was as much about crisis management as it was about public health. He enacted quarantine measures, provided medical care, and tried to keep panic from spreading faster than the disease itself. The plague was a test of leadership, and Marcus had to balance the needs of the citizens with the harsh realities of an empire stretched to its limits. His approach was a mix of stoic resilience and practical action, showing that sometimes the best way to deal with disaster is to face it head-on, even if it means making unpopular decisions. It's a testament to his character that he managed to maintain stability during such a turbulent period. Yet, despite his best efforts, Marcus couldn't escape the reality of ruling a diverse empire. The Roman Empire was a patchwork quilt of cultures, languages, and traditions, each with its own quirks and challenges. Managing this diversity required a delicate touch, and Marcus had to be both a unifying force and an adaptive leader. His policies aimed to integrate these diverse peoples while maintaining the empire's unity, a task that was like juggling flaming torches while riding a camel. Marcus Aurelius's domestic reign was a complex dance of reform, crisis management, and political pragmatism. He was the philosopher king who had to swap his scrolls for a rulebook, navigating the choppy waters of senatorial politics and public welfare. His legacy in these areas is as multifaceted as a Roman mosaic, blending wisdom, practicality, and an occasional touch of humor. This chapter of his story isn't just about the thinker in the toga. It's about the leader who faced the realities of power with a blend of idealism and realism. As we prepare to delve further into Marcus's reign, remember that his story is one of contrasts between thought and action, idealism and pragmatism, and the legend of the philosopher king versus the reality of the emperor. Stay tuned, because the saga of Marcus Aurelius is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in the complex tapestry of his rule. And so, as the imperial toga settled once again over the shoulders of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king found himself at the crossroads of legacy and reality, a juxtaposition as stark as a toga party and a Stoic symposium. Here was a man whose writings, those famous meditations, were crafted not in the serene quiet of a library, but amidst the clamor of military camps and the chaos of an empire stretched thin. If ever there was a testament to multitasking, Marcus was it. Philosopher by night, emperor by day, with a penchant for pondering life's big questions, while the world around him threatened to go up in flames like Rome's notorious fires. Marcus's meditations are not just a collection of philosophical musings. They are an intimate glimpse into the mind of a ruler grappling with the weight of the world. Written in Greek, a language of culture and sophistication, these reflections reveal a man seeking inner peace amid external turmoil. It's like finding Zen in the middle of a stock market crash. Yet, despite their lofty ideals, the meditations were never intended as a public manifesto. They were personal, almost like a diary written in the margins of imperial edicts. The appeal of Marcus's writings lies in their raw honesty and universal truths. They aren't just about ruling an empire, but about ruling oneself, an internal empire fraught with the same battles for order and stability. Lines like "the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts" offer a timeless reminder that we are what we think, a concept that resonates even in our digital age, where thoughts are often as fleeting as a tweet. Marcus's reflections on virtues like patience, humility, and resilience continue to inspire leaders, thinkers, and everyday folks who find themselves navigating the chaotic seas of modern life. But let's not get carried away on a tide of romanticism. The image of Marcus as the serene philosopher king is a seductive one, but it glosses over the gritty realities of his reign. This was a man who, despite his Stoic leanings, had to make decisions that would have given Socrates a headache. He was not immune to the rough and tumble of politics, nor was he a stranger to the harsh necessities of power. Marcus's reign was marked by military campaigns, economic strife, and the ever-present threat of political intrigue. His philosophical musings were a balm for the soul, but they were penned in a world where the sword was often mightier than the pen. Yet this duality is precisely what makes Marcus's legacy so compelling. He was both a dreamer and a doer, a thinker and a pragmatist. His ability to bridge these worlds is what set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He wasn't just theorizing about virtue. He was applying it in the governance of an empire that was as unwieldy as a Roman galley in a typhoon. His reign was a balancing act, like juggling flaming torches while reciting philosophy, a feat few could manage without getting burned. The reality of Marcus's rule is that it was defined by necessity as much as by idealism. His efforts to stabilize the empire through military action, legal reform, and public works were driven by a clear understanding that philosophy alone could not keep the wolves at bay. His legacy is not just the serene image of a philosopher in deep contemplation. It's the gritty reality of an emperor who had to keep a sprawling empire from unraveling at the seams. In considering Marcus's legacy, we must also question the romanticized narratives that have come to define his reign. The idea of the philosopher king is a powerful myth, one that has captured the imagination for centuries. It's a vision of leadership that is as alluring as it is elusive, a ruler guided by wisdom and virtue rather than ambition and greed. Yet, Marcus's own experiences reveal the tensions inherent in this ideal. His reign was not without its flaws, and his decisions, while often grounded in Stoic principles, were sometimes as ruthless as the times demanded. But perhaps this is where Marcus's true legacy lies, in his ability to navigate the complexities of power with a blend of idealism and realism. He was a leader who understood that governing an empire required both vision and pragmatism, a delicate dance that few could master. His meditations may offer glimpses into his inner life, but it is his actions, both the philosophical and the political, that provide the fullest picture of his reign. As we reflect on Marcus Aurelius today, his strategies and insights continue to hold relevance in modern governance. His emphasis on self-discipline, ethical leadership, and the importance of inner reflection are as pertinent now as they were in the tumultuous days of the Roman Empire. In an age where leaders are often scrutinized for their public personas rather than their private virtues, Marcus's example serves as a reminder that true leadership is as much about character as it is about charisma. In our own era of uncertainty, Marcus's teachings offer a framework for resilience and adaptability. His writings encourage us to find stability within ourselves, to embrace change, and to act with integrity even when the world around us seems to be spinning out of control. These are lessons that transcend time, offering guidance not just to those in positions of power, but to anyone seeking to navigate the complexities of modern life. So, as we close the book on Marcus Aurelius, we do so with an appreciation for the multifaceted nature of his legacy. He was a philosopher and an emperor, a dreamer and a realist, a man whose life and writings continue to resonate across the ages. His reign was a testament to the power of wisdom in the face of adversity, a reminder that even in the most challenging of times, the human spirit can prevail. In the end, Marcus Aurelius's story is one of enduring relevance, a timeless tale that speaks to the heart of what it means to lead with both courage and compassion. As we move forward, let us carry with us the lessons of his life, finding inspiration in his words and strength in his example. For in the ever-changing landscape of history, the legacy of Marcus Aurelius remains a guiding light, illuminating the path for generations to come. In the dust of Stamps, Arkansas, where the summers were so hot you could fry an egg on the sidewalk if you could afford the eggs, Maya Angelou's story began. Born Marguerite Johnson in 1928, she was a girl who would grow into a towering figure of American letters. But first, she had to navigate the peculiar and often painful landscape of the segregated South. It wasn't all doom and gloom, though there were plenty of moments that would make a sitcom writer proud. Maya and her brother, Bailey, were shipped off to live with their grandmother, Annie Henderson, at a tender age. Let's just say the journey from California to Arkansas was less of a road trip and more of a logistical nightmare. They traveled alone on a train for nearly 2,000 miles, a journey that today would make any adult question their life choices. Their grandmother, who they affectionately called Mama, was a woman of formidable presence and even more formidable finances. She owned the only black-operated general store in the area, a fact that made her something of a local celebrity in stamps. In the 1930s South, financial independence for a black woman was as rare as a snowstorm in July. Growing up in stamps was a masterclass in the absurdity of segregation. The town was literally divided into black and white sections, a fact that shaped every interaction and opportunity. The black section might not have had the best of everything, schools, amenities, or even streetlights, but it had a tight-knit community that looked out for its own. And while the white folks had their picket fences and air of superiority, they sure missed out on Mama Henderson's legendary dried apple pies, which were rumored to contain some kind of magic. Maya's childhood was an odd blend of idyllic and oppressive. On one hand, she had the freedom to roam the fields and woods, concocting elaborate stories and dreams. On the other, there were the harsh realities of racial discrimination that could turn even a simple trip to the store into a lesson in humiliation. In a world where a black child could be whipped for accidentally brushing against a white person, Maya learned early on that words could be both weapons and shields. Speaking of words, Maya was a voracious reader, devouring everything from Shakespeare to the Bible. If you think kids today have it tough with their tick-tock attention spans, imagine trying to find solace in Hamlet while the world outside is playing a never-ending loop of Jim Crow nonsense. Literature offered her an escape, a way to transcend the muddy waters of stamps and soar into worlds where color lines were blurred by the eloquence of language. Yet, it was not all literary escapism. Maya's life was punctuated by moments of stark reality that were anything but humorous. At the tender age of 8, she was sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend, a trauma that silenced her voice for nearly 5 years. She believed her words had killed the man, her unspoken curse bringing about his death after he was released from jail, a grim but convenient twist of fate. During those silent years, she communicated through books and listened, absorbing the world around her like a sponge. Her family was a vibrant tapestry of characters that could have leaped straight out of a Tennessee Williams play. There was Uncle Willie, Annie's son, who was disabled and often the target of local cruelty. His presence was a constant reminder of the world's harshness, but also of resilience. He was a man who used his own limitations to teach Maya the value of education, drilling her on math and reading with the ferocity of a tiger mom. The economic conditions were anything but forgiving. The Great Depression had left much of America reeling, and stamps was no exception. The black community faced unemployment rates that were through the roof, sometimes double those of their white counterparts. Money was tight, and luxuries were few. A nickel could buy a loaf of bread, but it was more likely to be saved for a rainy day or the next drought, which was always just around the corner. Social norms dictated a rigid structure to life. Sundays were reserved for church, a sanctuary where the community gathered not just to worship, but to find some semblance of equality. The church was a place where the hierarchy of race was briefly suspended, and everyone was just a sinner in need of salvation. It was also a venue for some of the most memorable social events, potluck dinners that showcased the culinary prowess of Stamp's finest, and perhaps a little bit of friendly rivalry over who made the best cornbread. Despite the grim realities, humor was a survival mechanism. The residents of Stamps had a way of using laughter to deflate the absurdity of their circumstances. Whether it was poking fun at the town's pompous white mayor or the irony of a segregated heaven as preached by local ministers, wit was a weapon sharper than any sword. And Maya, with her keen observational skills, soaked it all in. Her early life was a peculiar cocktail of love and cruelty, beauty and ugliness, education and ignorance. It was a childhood that could have broken many, but for Maya, it was the crucible that forged her into a poet who understood pain and a storyteller who could weave it into tapestries of hope. The streets of Stamps may have been dusty, but they were paved with the stories that would one day captivate the world. With a childhood as tumultuous and enlightening as Maya Angelou's, it's no surprise that her teenage years were equally riveting. By the time she hit her teens, the world was smack dab in the middle of World War II. The United States was a nation in flux. Industries were booming, jobs were aplenty, and yet the societal norms were still as rigid as a suit of armor. Into this chaos, Maya and her mother, Vivian Baxter, made the move to San Francisco. If you think moving from the backwoods of Arkansas to the bustling city by the bay was a culture shock, you'd be right. But Maya was no ordinary teen, and San Francisco was no ordinary city. San Francisco in the 1940 was a bit like a carnival, colorful, chaotic, and full of opportunities, if you knew where to look. The city was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, and the war had turned it into a bustling hub of activity. Shipyards were humming, and the streets were alive with the footsteps of people from all walks of life, all trying to carve out their piece of the American dream. It was here, amidst the fog and the clamor, that Maya Angelou landed a job that would set her apart from the crowd. San Francisco's first African-American female streetcar conductor. Now, if you're imagining a glamorous position, think again. Being a streetcar conductor was hard work, and getting the job was even harder. Maya, at the tender age of 16, was determined to break barriers, even if it meant facing rejection head-on. And face it she did, with the dogged persistence of someone who had already faced far worse in her young life. After being turned away more times than a door-to-door salesman, she finally landed the job. It was 1944, and Maya was making history, one streetcar at a time. The job came with its fair share of challenges. For starters, navigating the bustling streets of San Francisco wasn't for the faint of heart. Picture this. A teenager in a crisply pressed uniform, juggling the responsibilities of collecting fares, directing passengers, and keeping to a timetable that had all the flexibility of a military march. And let's not forget the social tensions of the time. Passengers weren't always thrilled to see a young black woman at the helm, but Maya handled it with the kind of grace and resilience that would come to define her entire life. She learned to deal with rude passengers, inclement weather, and the occasional runaway streetcar with a smile, or at least a grim determination. The pay for this roller coaster of a job, a modest sum, barely enough to get by, but rich in life lessons. These formative years in San Francisco were not just about streetcars and conductors' caps, though. Maya was also dipping her toes into the world of the arts, and the city was a perfect place for it. San Francisco was teeming with creativity, and Maya was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. She took dance classes and acted in plays, finding in the arts a new form of expression that was liberating and exhilarating. Her early forays into the world of performance would lay the groundwork for her future as a celebrated artist, but at the time, they were simply a means of exploring her own identity. The 1940 were a time of immense social and economic shifts, both for the nation and for Maya personally. The war had opened up new opportunities for women and minorities, but it had also exposed the fissures in America's social fabric. For black Americans, the promise of greater economic opportunity was often overshadowed by the reality of discrimination and segregation. Yet, these were also years of awakening and transformation. The winds of change were blowing, and Maya Angelou was riding them with both defiance and hope. In San Francisco, she found a community that was as vibrant and diverse as she was. It was a city that embraced change and celebrated individuality, and for the first time in her life, Maya felt like she belonged. Her experiences during these teenage years would shape her worldview and fuel her passion for social justice. Every rude passenger, every dance class, every performance was a stepping stone on her journey to becoming one of the most influential voices of her generation. Yet, it was not a path without obstacles. The societal norms of the time were as unyielding as the steel tracks Maya's streetcar rode upon. The 1940s might have been a decade of economic prosperity, but it was also a time of deep racial and gender inequalities. The job market was opening up, but not fast enough. The war effort required all hands on deck, but the deck was still segregated. And while Maya was making inroads into new territories, there were still many doors that remained firmly shut. But Maya Angelou was nothing if not resourceful. Her teenage years were a training ground for resilience, a masterclass in perseverance. She took the challenges in stride, learning from each experience and using them to fuel her ambitions. Her time as a streetcar conductor was more than just a job. It was a statement, a declaration of independence in a world that was only beginning to understand the concept. As the war came to an end, the world was a different place. The 1950s were on the horizon, and with them came a new set of challenges and opportunities. Maya was poised to take them on, armed with the lessons of her youth and the determination of someone who had already defied the odds. Her teenage years in San Francisco were a prelude to a life that would be as complex and multifaceted as the city itself, a life that would continue to inspire and challenge the world. The stage was set for Maya Angelou to become a legend, but her story was far from over. And so, as the curtain of the 1940s fell and the 1950s sashayed onto the stage, Maya Angelou found herself stepping into the limelight of a burgeoning career. The allure of showbiz was irresistible, a technicolor dream that promised escape from the drab sepia tones of everyday life. But beneath the sparkling facade, the world of entertainment was a beast with its own set of teeth, sharp and ready to bite anyone who didn't keep pace. Maya's debut into this glittery chaos came via the Porgy and Bess International Tour, a gig that combined her love for performance with an unparalleled opportunity to see the world. Now, if you're imagining luxurious travel and glamorous soirees, let's pop that bubble right now. Sure, the tour was a whirlwind of exotic locales, but the realities were more Greyhound bus than first-class jet. Performers were crammed into tiny compartments, the kind of cozy quarters that make a sardine can look spacious, all while lugging around costumes and set pieces like a never-ending game of Tetris. The financial side of showbiz was no less brutal. In the 1950s, the average performer on a gig like Porgy and Bess might earn about $100 a week. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $100 today. Not exactly a king's ransom, especially when you factor in the costs of living abroad. And let's not forget Uncle Sam, who always took his cut before you even saw your paycheck. For Maya and her fellow performers, the glitzy life was more about passion than paychecks. The tour itself was a grand odyssey, taking Maya from the bustling streets of Paris to the cobblestones of Vienna, and even to the vibrant chaos of Cairo. It was a time when the world itself was playing a new tune, post-war optimism was in the air, and cultures were colliding in ways that were both exciting and bewildering. Yet, as thrilling as it was to perform on stages across Europe and beyond, the reality of life on the road was far from a glamorous adventure. Picture a carousel spinning at breakneck speed, but instead of painted horses, you've got a troupe of performers trying to keep their balance amidst missed connections, dodgy accommodations, and the occasional bout of food poisoning. As for the audiences, they were as varied as the cities themselves. In Europe, Maya found a continent that was still recovering from the scars of war, where audiences were eager for distraction and entertainment. In Africa, the reception was different, more complex, layered with the shared history of colonialism and the burgeoning winds of change. Each performance was a diplomatic dance, a reminder of art's power to transcend boundaries, even as those very boundaries seemed to shift underfoot. But it wasn't just about the applause and the encores. Maya's time on the Porgy and Bess tour was an education in the broader world, a living classroom where culture, politics, and art collided in a spectacular fashion. She soaked it all in, her keen mind absorbing the nuances of each place like a sponge, storing them away for the stories she would one day tell. Traveling with a show like Porgy and Bess also highlighted the stark realities of segregation and racism, even on foreign shores. While the Jim Crow laws didn't follow them overseas, prejudice had a way of crossing oceans and borders with ease. In some places, performers were celebrated as stars. In others, they were treated with the same disdain they'd hoped to leave behind in America. It was a sobering reminder that the fight for equality was not confined to one nation. It was a global struggle that required resilience and relentless optimism. Despite the challenges, Maya's time on the road was a symphony of experiences, each note adding depth to her understanding of the world and her place in it. It was a period of growth, of discovery, and of honing her craft, both as a performer and as a future rider. The tour demanded discipline, creativity, and a willingness to adapt, skills that would serve her well in the years to come. And then there were the personal connections, the friendships forged in the crucible of shared experience. The camaraderie among the performers was a lifeline, a reminder that they were not alone in this unpredictable journey. They shared laughter and tears, triumphs and setbacks, all while navigating the unpredictable landscape of showbiz. For Maya, these relationships were as vital as the performances themselves, a support network that would buoy her spirits even during the toughest times. As the Porgy and Best tour came to an end, Maya returned to the United States with a wealth of experiences and stories. Her worldview expanded, and her horizons broadened. The 1950s were in full swing, decade of post-war prosperity and cultural upheaval. America was in the throes of a social revolution, with the civil rights movement gaining momentum and the arts becoming a powerful vehicle for change. For Maya, the future was a blank canvas, waiting for her to paint it with the vibrant hues of her experiences. She had tasted the world beyond America's shores, seen the beauty and the ugliness, the hope and the despair. And while the road had been long and the challenges many, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to use her voice to make a difference. The stage was set for the next act in Maya Angelou's remarkable life, a journey that would take her from the lights of the theatre to the pages of history. But for now, she was ready to take on whatever came next, armed with the lessons of the past and the promise of the future. Her story was far from over, and the world was about to hear her roar. With the spotlight of the theatre dimming as the Porgy and Best tour wrapped up, Maya Angelou found herself confronting the enticing yet unpredictable world of riding. It was the 1960s, a decade as tumultuous as a soap opera on steroids. The kind of era where turning on the news was like stepping into an episode of The Twilight Zone, featuring civil rights upheavals, cultural revolutions, and a publishing industry that was as welcoming as a cactus in a balloon factory. Now, before we dive into the world of manuscripts and publishing contracts, let's talk about the reality of being an author in the 1960s, a profession often idealized as a life of quiet contemplation by a sunny window, where inspiration flows as freely as the morning coffee. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. For starters, publishing industry was a fortress guarded by gatekeepers who treated new authors like a flat earth convention, skeptically, if at all. Maya's journey to literary acclaim was anything but a sprint. She was living in New York City, a place that promised dreams but delivered them with a side of grit and a subway delay. While the city was a hub for burgeoning artists and writers, getting published was akin to winning the lottery, but with worse odds. In 1969, the year her first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, would finally see the light of day, Maya was a single mother with a resume that included nightclub performer, journalist, and even a stint as a coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. A colorful past, sure, but not exactly the stuff that made publishers salivate. The story of how I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings almost didn't get published is a classic tale of perseverance meeting serendipity. Initially, the idea of writing her life story was suggested by a friend, the author James Baldwin, who knew the power of her narrative. But even with Baldwin's encouragement, getting a publisher interested was like trying to sell ice to an Eskimo. The manuscript was rejected by several publishers before Robert Loomis, an editor at Random House, took a chance on her. But here's where it gets interesting. Loomis didn't just say, "Sure, let's publish this." He played a game of reverse psychology that would make any parent of a teenager proud. He dared Maya to write the book, suggesting she couldn't pull it off. This tactic worked like a charm, because nothing lights a fire under someone quite like a challenge. Maya, ever the contrarian, took to her typewriter with the determination of a marathon runner on a caffeine high. The result? A masterpiece that would not only be published, but would also revolutionize autobiographical writing. The publication of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings was a game changer, but let's not romanticize the process. Maya didn't just hit the literary jackpot and ride off into a sunset of royalties and book tours. The reality was more grueling. The book was initially met with both critical acclaim and controversy. It was praised for its unflinching portrayal of racism and sexual abuse, topics that were about as welcome in polite society as a skunk at a garden party. But Maya's raw honesty resonated with readers, and her book quickly became a bestseller, eventually selling millions of copies worldwide. The 1960s publishing world was a beast with its own set of quirks and challenges. While today's aspiring authors have the luxury of digital platforms and self-publishing, back then it was all about face-to-face meetings with editors who had the power to make or break careers. The economic stakes were high because, much like today, a book's success could hinge on a good review in the New York Times or a coveted spot on Oprah's predecessor, whatever that might have been, a radio show perhaps. For Maya, the stakes were personal. She was laying her life bare on the page, turning her past traumas into a narrative that was both deeply personal and universally relatable. And let's not forget the cultural backdrop. The 1960s were a time of societal upheaval, where traditional norms were being questioned and new ideas were taking root. Civil rights marches, feminist movements, and anti-war protests were the soundtrack of the era, and Maya's work was both a reflection and a catalyst of these changes. Her autobiographical style broke the mold, blending prose with poetry, personal narrative with broader social commentary. It was a literary revolution wrapped in a memoir. But let's get real for a moment. The myth of overnight success is as persistent as your grandmother's fruitcake, appealing in theory, but hard to swallow in reality. Maya's rise to literary fame was built on years of hard work and a willingness to share her most vulnerable moments with the world. Success, when it came, was the result of a perfect storm of talent, timing, and tenacity. So, what about the economic realities? The advance for a book like Maya's in the late 1960s might have been a few $1,000s, enough to pay some bills, but not exactly a golden ticket to financial freedom. Royalties were a long-term game, dependent on book sales and the whims of the reading public. For Maya, writing was not just a career but a calling, an opportunity to use her voice to spark change and challenge perceptions. Her story doesn't just end with the publication of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It was merely the prologue to a literary career that would see her pen 6 more autobiographies, each one peeling back the layers of her life and her times. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, Maya Angelou emerged not just as a writer, but as a cultural icon, a voice for those who had been silenced and a beacon of hope for future generations. In peeling back the curtain on Maya's transition from performer to writer, we see not just the grit and grace that defined her journey, but also the broader tapestry of a world in flux. She was both a product and a shaper of her times, a woman whose words could cut through the noise of the era like a lighthouse through fog. Her legacy is a testament to the power of storytelling to transcend barriers and transform lives. Yet, as her story unfolds, it becomes clear that the journey was as complex and multifaceted as the woman herself. And just like that, we find ourselves at another crossroads, poised to explore the next chapter in the extraordinary life of Maya Angelou. As the curtain rose on the final act of Maya Angelou's life, she found herself in a role that was both familiar and ever-evolving, that of a celebrated author and staunch activist. The 1970s and beyond were decades defined by their own brand of chaos. Think disco balls, polyester, and a political landscape that was shakier than a Jenga tower in an earthquake. But for Maya, these were prime years of influence, advocacy, and yes, a bit of unexpected humor courtesy of the global stage. After cementing her place in the literary world with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Maya Angelou wasn't content to rest on her laurels, which by now were piling up like a writer's unedited manuscripts. She threw herself into the civil rights movement with the kind of fervor usually reserved for last-minute term papers. This was no academic exercise, though. She worked alongside figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, 2 men who had a knack for stirring up trouble, or as history likes to call it, change. Angelou's activism was grounded in her belief that words could be as powerful as a picket line or a protest march, a conviction that saw her speaking at rallies, writing essays, and lending her voice to a cause that was more marathon than sprint. During these years, Angelou witnessed societal shifts that were as seismic as they were overdue. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were more than just legislative victories. They were symbolic of a nation grappling with its conscience. Yet, While these milestones were celebrated, the road to equality was far from a smooth ride. Picture a road trip where the map is constantly changing, and every turn seems to lead to a detour. Economic disparities persisted, and the promise of equality often felt like a mirage on the horizon. But Angelou was undeterred. She understood that change was incremental, a series of small victories that, when added up, could topple even the most formidable barriers. Meanwhile, Maya's literary career continued to flourish like a well-watered garden. She published a series of autobiographies, 7 in total, each peeling back layers of her life and offering readers a glimpse into the complex tapestry of human experience. Titles like Gather Together in My Name and The Heart of a Woman not only expanded her narrative, but also challenged conventional storytelling with their blend of poetry and prose. Her voice was as distinct as a fingerprint, and her ability to capture the essence of the human spirit was unparalleled. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Maya Angelou had become a cultural icon, a status that came with its own set of peculiarities. She was a sought-after speaker and lecturer, her words carrying weight in rooms where decisions were made and futures were shaped. If you thought TED talks were a big deal, imagine Angelou commanding an audience with nothing but her voice and a microphone, a one-woman show that was both riveting and transformative. Her speaking fees reflected her status, sometimes reaching as high as $20,000 per engagement, a testament to the value placed on her insights and eloquence. But let's not pretend that life, as a literary and cultural luminary, was all roses and champagne. The economic realities of being a writer meant that financial stability was often as elusive as a perfect first draft. Book advances and royalties were subject to the whims of the market, and while Maya's works were widely celebrated, the publishing world was still a business, one that could be as cutthroat as it was fickle. Yet, Angelou navigated these waters with the grace of a seasoned sailor, her focus always on the message rather than the money. As the years marched on, Maya Angelou's legacy grew, her influence extending beyond the written word to encompass music, theater, and even film. She wrote the screenplay for the 1972 film Georgia, Georgia, becoming the first black woman to have her script produced as a feature film. This was no small feat, considering Hollywood's track record with diversity was about as impressive as a three-legged race at a turtle convention. But once again, Angelou defied the odds, her work breaking boundaries and setting new precedents. And then there was the poetry. Oh, the poetry. Angelou's verses were like a masterclass in emotional resonance, each line a testament to her ability to distill the human experience into words that cut to the quick. Her poem, On the Pulse of Morning, recited at Bill Clinton's 1993 inauguration, encapsulated the promise of a new era with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. As she spoke to the nation, her voice carried the weight of history and the hope of the future, a reminder that even in times of uncertainty, words could illuminate the path forward. Despite the seriousness of her work, Angelou never lost her sense of humor, a trait that endeared her to audiences worldwide. She found amusement in the ironies of life, often pointing out the absurdities with a wry smile and a twinkle in her eye. One of the more delightful ways her words have permeated global culture is through their unexpected appearances in the strangest of places. From being quoted in political speeches to popping up on motivational posters in corporate offices, Angelou's wisdom has been embraced, and at times, hilariously misapplied. Picture her words about courage and resilience adorning the walls of a dentist's office, a gentle reminder that even a root canal can be an act of bravery. As we draw the curtain on Maya Angelou's remarkable life, it's clear that her legacy is as vast and varied as the experiences she chronicled. She bore witness to a century of change, her voice a constant in a world that was anything but. Her words continue to inspire, challenge, and comfort, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling. And while her journey may have ended in 2014, at the age of 86, her influence lives on, a beacon for those who dare to dream, to speak, and to create. In the grand tapestry of history, Maya Angelou's life is a vibrant thread, woven through with humor, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to truth. She was a woman who understood that words had the power to transform, to heal, and to unite, a legacy that will echo through the ages like a well-loved refrain. So as we reflect on her story, let's carry forward her lessons, finding hope in her wisdom, and perhaps a chuckle in the unexpected places it finds us. After all, as Angelou herself once said, we may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. Wise words, indeed, from a woman who knew the value of a good fight and a great story.